call to order. Yamhill County Budget Committee, 2020-21. We are going into transit.
And so next presenter will be Cynthia Thompson, who's our transit manager. And there is a tab. It'll be in the community services section, but then there's a transit tab, and then Cynthia provided some handouts, but the actual budget starts on page 93. And all right, Cynthia, I'm assuming you can hear us okay?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Good afternoon.
Good
Commissioner,
afternoon.
there's a little bit of a delay, so I sent money. Good afternoon, Commissioners and Budget Committee members. It's a pleasure to be here today virtually, and maybe this might be your first virtual Budget Committee presentation, I imagine. I think it's kind of a good thing that we're going to be increasing our skill set for the virtual access meetings and remote working, and maybe when it's appropriate in the future, we'll be able to be the one good thing that comes out of this pandemic. I just want to mention for the new members, just a couple of things that may not be on our list to know what's happening currently with Yamhill County Transit. But transit is considered an essential service, and it's a critical lifeline for many older adults, people with disabilities, and low-income frontline workers. And we are really learning that as this COVID situation has come upon us. We're actually operating almost at full service. We had to reduce a few routes, but we are covering demand with our door-to-door service. And we are currently operating fare-free, and ridership is about 25% of the normal fares. And for those of you, you probably figured this out from looking at the budget, but Yamhill County Transit is primarily funded with state and federal grants. So I'm going to dive right in, and I'll try to be as brief as I can for such a talker like me. But this coming fiscal year, 2021, we were on target with this budget to implement another round of service improvements that were in line with our transit development plan. Then, of course, COVID-19 appeared and it's caused a bit of a detour for all of us. But this budget reflects the improvements, and depending on what happens with the pandemic, we'll plan to implement these when needed. So your binder includes a handout that I provided that shows the accomplishments for 2019 as well as for 2021. And as Ken said, the transit budget starts on page 93. So let's just turn to 93 now if you haven't already. And you can ask questions as I go through, or I'll leave time after each section to have for you to ask questions. We'll start with the revenue, and I'm going to highlight just the line items where there's been a change or it needs a little more description. I'm not going to go into detail on ones that are pretty much the same as previous years. So starting with the revenue, line item 30102, this is a reserve line item, and typically in the past it's just had the rent income we get from the transit center from First Transit. But you'll notice this year we added $50,000, and that is because we included a reserve in our state transportation improvement fund. So that was the new funding that came from the state employee payroll tax, and so it's in our plan, and so we added it to the budget accordingly. Then if you go to line item 33133, 707,072, that is for the bus grant for 2 large buses and 1 minivan. It's actually out for bid probably next week, and we expect to get delivery fiscal year 2021. Line item 33499 for $1,697,086. This is the new funding that's provided through the statewide employee payroll tax that's dedicated to transit. And it must be spent on projects that are in our adopted state transportation improvement plan. And the budget projections are based on the assumption that Yamhill County Transit will be able to implement these projects. And just a reminder that these funds can only be spent on new service and not maintain existing core service. Line item 33402, 1,294,817. This number includes the annual operating funding that Yamhill County Transit receives from our federal 5310 funds and includes a $960,090 capital grant that we got for 3 buses, and those are also part of this bid process. They're sending out probably early next week. We go to 34003, fair revenue. We base this on the assumption that we're adding service and there'd be an increase in ridership. In reality, right now with COVID-19, we probably will lose fare revenue, but FTA and the Federal Transit Administration and ODOT are providing a grant that can pay for lost revenue and other COVID-related expenses. And I think the rest of the revenue section is in line with previous years, so if anybody have any questions about revenue?
Cynthia, you mentioned, because I know under the COVID and some of the CARES Act and funding, it seems like transit and transportation seems to be the only one that we're actually getting clear direction that funds are going to be available for that. But we don't have any, I know you sent me an email last night, but I figured we would talk about it here, but we haven't built in any placeholders in this, but you have, or you're in the process of applying for funds to cover some of that. Do we need to build in some more placeholders into the revenues? I don't know what the timing of this is.
You may want to. We already applied for the grant, and it is for $814,022, I think it is. And it's obviously most of our grants are based on, we spend the money, then we get reimbursed. So we're keeping track of all of our COVID-related expenses. But we won't get the agreement for probably another month, maybe, or 3 weeks, something like that. We certainly could add it. I do think we're probably going to spend less than we thought in our STIF funding, so it might balance out. So that's really kind of up to you if you want to add it. I think it wouldn't hurt to put it into the placeholder. Anybody have questions about that?
Yeah, thanks for clarifying.
Okay, so let's move on to expenses, and the first section is personal services, and you notice that it increased from last year. And that's because the 2021 budget includes the addition of 1 new FT, full-time equivalent, and it assumes a wage that's similar to what our current full-time equivalent employee is. And anybody have questions about that?
I guess I would just add additional information just for some understanding on this budget.
Okay.
I'm just providing information to the committee. So what you see in here, Cynthia's position as the transit manager, we have a contract with Cynthia to provide those services. She's providing that as a contractor. And we have staff. That was new for last year, was 1 additional staff person to start having some county staff also involved with the transit. And what we're seeing is with the workload and everything else, we're proposing to start adding a second one as the board and the transit board will have some decisions to make over the next several years on management and staffing and everything else for the transit system. And we haven't had that big discussion yet because right now we just got through a major RFP for the transit provider. And so to implement too many changes or kind of at once, we want to be sensitive to that because also recognizing that new transit provider agreement, which we'll get into once we get down into materials and services, we saw a pretty substantial increase on the cost for paying for those services. So we have a lot of questions that are still unanswered on as far as management and staffing with the transit budget. So
All right, that's why there's no bus driver, there's no employees in here, that's all covered in.
that's all contracted out
That's all
with the service
contracted out.
provider with Folks
Okay.
Transit.
It's a 720.17.
So what we have in here
That's
is
easy to find.
we are recognizing that there is some administration and management of the, you see what we have in here, plus your discretionary, we're getting close to a $6 million program and not a lot of staff. I mean, there's a lot of moving pieces for a $6 million program to facilitate and have a transit program. And it's something that we've done the transit plan. Cynthia and I have had multiple conversations, and I know Rick is the liaison to transit, has had conversations with Cynthia and with the committee. But there's a lot of things that need to happen here, and the additional staffing that we've talked about here is starting that progression on getting more administrative staff, because all of these grant funds that you see up here, like anyone who's familiar with grants, there's a lot of reporting, there's a lot of applications, there's there's no such thing as free money. I mean, when you look at all these grant programs and the requirements associated with it, there's a lot of reporting and administration that takes place. It's not done by the provider, it's actually done by Cynthia. And up to this point, it's been Cynthia, and then we have the one new employee that we added last year, and then a very part-time clerical person who, so it kind of works out to Cynthia and 1.2, maybe 1.3 folks that are doing this. So I just wanted to add that bit of information, Cynthia, on what we're doing.
Well, just one little short thing I would add is that the good news is we've gotten a lot of grants, we've got our fleet in a really good state of good repair, and we've gotten, I think, over the biennium, we're like averaging $13 million in a 2-year period. And that's great news. The downside to that is, and then the new STIF funding had very complex reporting, and we have a new STIF plan we have to submit in this biennium also, in this fiscal year. So that, whenever you have that much, just like Ken said, there's just a lot of moving parts, and reporting takes time, and so that's really the need. So we'll move on to materials and services. Does somebody have a question?
I have a question about
There was a question.
Cynthia, it's Lindsay. What has ridership and usage rates been, how are they trending? Maybe over the past
Right now,
2-3 years?
Right now, due to COVID, you mean?
No, just the past couple of years, 2-3 years.
We were around we've been averaging around 300,000 rides a year. And in the last couple of years, it went down slightly. I don't really know the reason for that exactly. I would say that the number one problem that we have is we don't have bus stops out there. And that's a problem. We know it, and it's a high priority on our project list. We don't have signage, we don't have markings. They are online, you can find them, they're all geocoded and that sort of thing. So that's kind of one of the projects that's high priority, but we haven't finished it yet. And I do think that affects ridership. So I think the bus fleet looks good now. They're marked and they have graphics so people know what we do. So all of that, and then the new services, I think would result in higher ridership. And we've seen some examples of that. But now then COVID hit, so currently we're at about 25% of our normal daily ridership.
Okay, and you said it was fare free. So do we charge for the door-to-door service?
Right now, because of COVID, we're doing fares throughout the system, and that's mostly keep the staff safe, so we're not handling money, and all of those close interactions seem to happen with fare collection. But normally, we obviously charge fare under normal circumstances.
Okay, thank you.
So if we move to materials and services and fuel, 520.04, we had projected a higher cost fuel, and that was because we were planning to add service and we expected, use more fuel. Obviously, with COVID, fuel prices are actually lower, and because we're probably delaying our service improvements, that most likely the cost probably won't come in quite as high as we had anticipated. 610.01 and 611.02, that's for professional services and contract services, and as Ken mentioned, that includes the BCPL, my contract, my services, and as well as it includes the temporary staffing that we have and other vendors who assist us with things like annual bus inspections, translation services, that sort of thing. It shows an increase from the previous year because we assumed there might be additional costs due to the service enhancements and the next STIF plan being prepared in this fiscal year. Now if you turn to page 94, top of page 94, added budgeting. I mention this every year, but this line item titled sufficiently captured expenses that are attributed to the line item. This is really the line item used for the majority of Yamhill County Transit's customer information program. So essentially everything related to communications with our transit customers, our stakeholders, website, bus schedules, rider alerts, bus graphics from shelters, all of those sorts of things are included in this. And we have a project in our SIF plan, the State Transportation Improvement Fund plan, that includes updating and improving our website. And our goal for this year was to actually do a real marketing campaign to promote the new smart bus technology that we now have on the buses for real-time bus information. And this is funded essentially completely with the funds, almost all of it from the state funding. And then the line share of our expenses, as always, is 720.17, and that is the major expense for the transit, the cost of the service provider, operations and maintenance. And as I mentioned in the handout, the most significant accomplishment for 2019-20 was our request for proposal process for service provider for the Yamhill County Transit operations and maintenance. We received quite a bit of interest. We had 2 really good finalists, but the bids came in a lot higher and said than we had anticipated. So our negotiations took a little longer, and we're a little challenged, but we resulted in a 5-year contract that began April 1st with Transit, and it's at an hourly rate in this fiscal year of $60.17 per service hour. And this budget number assumes that we're going to add 9,910 hours of new service. And I think the rest of the materials and service expenses are in line with previous years. So does anybody have any questions about that section?
Cynthia, I have a question. I don't know if you'd be better to address it or Kim would be better to address it. With the additional cost of the new contract for First Transit, are we charging enough when we rent back to them the transit center? Are we getting enough back on the rent we're charging them to cover the cost of the transit center?
You want to answer that, Ken? I think we are.
Yes.
Yeah, because my
I
question
wanted to
was,
look at what we had for our building reserve, and yes.
yeah, because my question is we're increasing our costs to them. But did anything that we need to improve, since we're much more expensive, are they paying the fair market value for it?
They pay, for the rent is $16,488, and because it's covered, the maintenance of it is covered by Joe's shop, facilities maintenance, and he has the building rent at $16,400. So we are charging them enough to cover what we normally charge every other department for maintenance.
And do we charge Ken on a lot of those things? The transit center is one that comes to my mind, but are we charging in that reserve, are we charging them enough for future maintenance and future, so if we have to do let's say replace the stucco on the outside of the building, are we putting enough away that will give us money to do that deferred maintenance?
Is that 16,000 a year?
Well, can I answer that, Jim?
But what I would highlight is what that payment, it's a very low number.
Yeah.
But, and so what happens is what we do with our building rent, and when Joe does his presentation for facilities, you'll see that it's essentially all of our departments across the county all pay into a pool. They all pay we call it rent, but it's not really rent, but they pay into a pool. And that covers janitorial, heat, water, lights, a lot of those utilities that we have. And we do increases on an annual basis, but I mean, it's significant. It doesn't truly pay for the maintenance staff that go over there. Admittedly, that's not one of the more intensive maintenance as some of our other facilities.
Brand new.
Right.
And the more we charge them, the more we pay.
And so, and we take a percentage.
contract.
And we take a percentage because most of it goes into maintenance and operations, but we do take a percentage of that and we put it into the capital reserve, which is 4027 that Justin will be presenting later. And then that's one that departments then, if they have major capital requests, Joe a lot of times will identify specific projects, but if a department wants to do a remodel or do something like that, then they would make a request and there could be, it could end up on the project list for that year.
Yeah.
Otherwise, anything else that's really major, like if transit wanted to do an addition, just a really rough, wanted to add another restroom out there. Typically, the department would set aside funds within that departmental budget to do that addition, that above and beyond. The facilities we don't necessarily do for expansion or additional, that would come out of this budget. And a lot of times, like Cynthia will get grants, much like right now, the focus has been purchasing buses and buying buses, but then that could change to bus stops, expanded facilities, administrative offices, as an example. But that doesn't necessarily come out of facilities. So it's kind of with, what the lease and the rent really looks like. It's not a true rent or lease model. To say that, obviously, for 16,000 a year.
If I were to add, I do plan to put some funding, or actually put it in our next STIP plan, funding for some things we need to do at the transit center. So Ken's right, I think if we, for expansion or remodel or changes to that facility, I would apply for a grant for that.
Thanks, Cynthia.
All right, just one last item, and then I think we're done other than questions. If you move to the capital section, line item 800.33, 1,917,518. So this is the total expense for us grants that you saw up in the revenue section, but it also includes the match. The good news this year is all the match dollars are coming from the STIF funds, so they don't have to spend any county funds for the match. So that's a really nice thing. So, that's it. It's all buses in that capital line item.
Cynthia, do you know off the top of your head, how many buses have we replaced out of the total inventory? How many have were purchased in the last 4 or 5 years?
Yeah, I can tell you, I'm gonna discount the new ones and all the used ones.
Right, that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking the new ones.
So last summer, time goes so fast, we got 10 new buses. And then this spring, we got 6 new buses. And that's 16. And then we have 5 buses on order that we'll get probably by next, actually these ones won't take quite as long, so I expect them probably in about a year, or a little less than a year. And then one more minivan, so that'll be 6 more. They aren't here yet, so that's a decent. We own, well, right now we have some that are getting ready to be disposed of, but we have 36 vehicles We need really about 31 to 32, including spares. So we have a few extras, but some of those we're just keeping until we get the next round of buses, or we haven't gotten in the process to dispose of them yet. So I had the following figure. I don't have it in the last 5 years. I can tell you, in this last year, it's been, I think, $5 million or something in buses. I don't have the exact number, but I could get it to you.
So we've turned over
Yeah.
over 50%, but the ones we have on are over 50% of our fleet. And we used to buy older used buses from other things that we get them on the road. We're lucky to sometimes get a month out of them, 3 months out of them, bought a couple just for parts. So the position of our fleet's actually real good after these buses will be in real good condition.
I think it's a good thing because we don't know what's gonna happen with funding, down the road with all of this going on, so I'm glad we're in this state. We've turned it around. It was about like 75% of the fleet was beyond its useful life and way beyond it, and now we're at about like maybe 30% or just barely beyond the useful life, and 70 are in good shape. Now, we do travel a lot of miles, 700, around 700,000 a year, so they get, you put the miles on pretty fast, but we're in a pretty good state right now. We have a plan, we got that, and so that's, if we can get back to normal life, then things will be good. So, thank you. You guys, anybody else have any other questions?
Yours is the most artistically pleasing
Yeah.
backdrop that we've seen.
Oh,
As far as this goes, it's lovely.
Don't tell the sheriff though that we said that.
well, I have so much glare problem, and I kept trying to move it around so wicked dark wall, and I just kept I still have the glare, but.
Did you
I can
paint?
barely see my notes.
Did you paint for this?
Pardon?
Did you paint? Did you paint the walls black?
Those are little class paintings, yeah, I decided I should paint.
No, I'm talking about the walls. Did you paint them black for this?
Oh, no, I didn't think that one. I just like that one.
Too bad you can't put it in our special.
It looks nice.
All right. Thank you very much, Cynthia.
Does anybody know the bus manufacturer folks? I just want to mention there's a guy, a long time owner of what's called Chet Key Northwest Bus Sales. He passed away recently, and I just thought, in case anybody knows him, he'd been in the industry for 30, 40 years probably, and he had not any COVID-related problem. It was a cancer or something like that, but sad loss to our industry, so I just thought I'd mention it for maybe the public out there if anybody's watching.
Thank
He was
you.
Really good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia.
Take care.
Thank you.
All right, good luck. Have a good
Thank you.
meetings. You're
Thank-
almost done.
Thank you.
Getting close. I know. I don't want to sound pessimistic on public transportation, but what is the goal with that? Like usership that pays, brings back about 5% of the expense. Is that normal across the country? Like $6 million expense, you get $300,000.
Some it's higher, some it's lower.
Is it really?
It's a problem in other, like Clackamas County, I know they were having the same issue. And the solution has always been to raise the payroll taxes, which is gonna come to a head here pretty quick, so
Yeah, that seems,
at some
Oh.
point.
Subsidized.
Yeah, and I know we've, because it's kind of I don't remember the last time that fare revenue or fares were increased in quite some time, but then it also can be, it can count against you if you increase the fare revenue, and then that can have an impact on ridership as well.
well, I'm looking at like, you could quadruple the fare revenue and it doesn't even come close to covering, that is obviously what you're trying to accomplish with it, you would kill that. But
Well, I think in the next 3 to 4 years, when the transit district is formed, the next 3 to 4 years, that's gonna be a big decision of the board of commissioners. Do we actually, it is a district, it is a tax, we can't collect taxes. Do we separate that from Yamhill County and actually make it its own taxing district, transit taxing district? Those are some big decisions in the next 3 to 4 years.
Yeah, we had this conversation.
If you look at Sandy, they've privatized it. They just use these small little buses and it's cost effective, it's less
Well, I just-
expensive. It's a fraction of what this is.
I just ran some numbers. It seems like you almost cover Uber drivers going anywhere you want.
It
For
does, yeah.
300,000 riders at that amount. Averages about $30 a ride. I'm thinking I can get about anywhere in Yamhill County for $30.
Well, I think for years, part of, especially in smaller cities, but really too, they've never been really pushed to pay what their portion
Nope.
of what their input is. So we're bankrolling
hmm
Yeah.
all the cities that use the service, like Yamhill, Carlton,
Newburgh.
Amity,
Yeah, I see it out. I mean, everywhere I go, it's rolling, but I take a look at it when I go by and I'm like, ah, there's 2 people in there. Like that's a long ways
Yeah.
out of town for, so,
Yeah, you're right.
Mr. Ward.
Dwarf, did you say Mr. That's D. Dwarf, Mr. Dwarf?
Assessor, hello, welcome.
Hi, Dwarf.
This is the entertainment portion of our meeting.
Yes, I've been waiting for this.
I was just trying to think of how I could spruce up my backdrop after getting done. Now there's a competition.
Yeah, you're not even
It's not
close.
just- It's not just your.
Oh, Bulldogs.
My high school letter from track.
Okay, what else you
You're-
got?
You're definitely of a different theme than Cynthia.
It's not just your backdrop either.
I know.
How is, thank you for the time today. I'm glad to see everybody. It's been a long time since we've been collectively seeing each other in a group. So thank you for the opportunity, Christian. Hello. Hello. All right. I didn't know if it was time for me now or if you're gonna go. I've been called to arms, so, okay. I'll have the council stand down, please.
Admittedly, this one's gonna be an adventure because with
Oh, that's funny.
Christian,
There's a lot of different
the
people
clerk,
coming up.
Justin, and Derek
It's
are
gonna
all
be,
in this block. So
Okay.
Bill and Ted's
Sounds
Excellent
good.
No telling.
Vacation.
Assessor, it's good to see you.
Thank you. And thank you, commissioners, Mr. Elmer, Ms. Bershauer. I know Carolina's got to be in there. I saw Ken. Anybody?
And now
Again,
Justin.
thank you for the time today.
I just joined. I was in the old meeting.
Okay, sign out. We'll call you. I'll text you.
Hey, Derek.
All right.
Try again.
Just a quick, so Mary, just a quick reassessment. I think I definitely be Christian and Justin in backdrop. So
Yeah.
down to.
Oh, yeah.
Cynthia, but I'll see if I can figure something out. Anywho, yeah, so thank you guys. This is interesting times and just know that the assessment and tax office, with the support of administration, the IT department, we have been very successful in transitioning to telecommuting and still providing all the services and meeting the needs of the citizens we serve. It has been a journey. My team is full of solutioneers, is what I call them. We continue to find ways to meet folks' needs. So with that, if there's not any questions, I'll jump into just a quick summary before the numbers, or has that been the way it's running so far?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, great. So in your budget packets, I provided a memo that kind of gave a state of affairs. I'm just gonna hit some key points on that. And then if you have questions about that material, or if you want to hold them for the numbers, we can talk about the GLs. I'm ready to dive into any questions you might have. I've looked at this a lot of different ways. I've met with my peers at other counties. It's somewhat a similar issue statewide. So I'll go through that, and if you have questions, let me know. First of all, talking about the revenue points, one thing I wanted to bring up about revenue is that 95% of the revenue is indirect funding outside of our control. We have very little revenue that we decide what the fees are gonna be, if we're gonna charge a fee at all, or provide a service and charge a fee. Obviously, by the numbers, the lion's share comes from what we call revenue. Really, it's the general fund and what is called the CAFA grant. For those that don't know, the CAFA grant is, it's the County Assistance for County Assessors Financial Assistance Program. Basically, through the recording fees and delinquent interest, there's a pool of money that gets collected statewide, and that money gets distributed to the counties based on a schedule. It's partially need-based, but it's mostly partial count days. They need to do a reassessment of how they distribute that, I think, because some of the larger counties in Metro are getting significant funding through this grant program, and they maybe are not as in need at this point as even our friends to the east, way east, and ourselves in Yamhill County. So CAFA makes up about 360,000 of that, revenue line items, and the rest is really general fund. We'll see more about that when we get into the actual numbers. So let's see, I'm gonna move from that as those key points to personnel key points. And really, this is where the story for assessment and tax lies is, one, we're a personnel office. We're not a revenue office. We have no revenue streams outside of that small 5% of fees that we cobble together to try to offset some operating expenses. And historically, there's been a lot of turnover. Prior to my appointment as assessor, the office, for those who were around at the time, it was either, you could look at a couple of things. There was a lot of turnover, either a revolving door, we were putting together appraisers for other counties, or we just had a hard time keeping staff. And because of that, there was a void created in vacancies that allowed for a beginning balance to be accrued. And by not filling those positions, that beginning balance cobbled forward over what is, I've looked at 10 years worth of run rates, but really the story is consistent, 10 or 5, no matter how you look at it. So having vacant positions over the last 5 budget cycles, our office has saved $1.279 million in personnel expenses. That's to say that we didn't spend that money that was allocated to those positions for various reasons. Primarily, it was the inability to recruit and retain. And I'm proud to say that over the last 3 years, we have recruited excellent high-end employees. We're able to pull from other counties even. We pulled an employee from out of state, and it's really turned into a highly functional office that I put us up against anyone in the state in terms of our skill levels and what we're able to do. And that's a good thing. Trucking along the personnel section of the budget, expenses have increased by 39%, 651,000 essentially over that same period. And discretionary allocations over that same period for our office increased 23,000. So $620,000 of additional expenses relative to personnel expenses increasing, PERS increases, medical insurance, all of that. We've not had to request an add back or an effort to make our department whole. We've always sort of kept that in-house and through vacancies absorb those additional expenses. Our office is focusing on employee retention versus turnover. It's very expensive to retrain employees. It's expensive to train them up to have them go somewhere else, or train them up and have them be disgruntled and leave. So we built a new culture. We built a new office environment. And I think most of the commissioners have experienced it some way, either through citizen involvement or correspondence, or just stopping by to say hello and get a different vibe for what we're doing. And what that's led to is we're more fully staffed. We haven't had any turnover other than one person following their heart to Tacoma for a fiance. And other than that, over the 4 years that I've been running this office, it's been very stable.
Excuse me, Derek.
Outside of that, yes.
excuse me, sorry to interrupt you. I wanted, before you got too far, can you explain the $40,000 foreclosure revenue? How does that get into your office? Into your revenue?
Sure. When you say foreclosure revenue, there's a couple of different things that foreclosures that we're involved in. So, if there's a bankruptcy surrounding a foreclosure, then we are able to, through delinquent interest and the back taxes, we can recoup some of the money that we need to offset expenses relative to bankruptcy proceedings. Other than that, foreclosures in terms of if the county forecloses on something and then it gets sold either back to the prior owner or it gets sold on the open market to another party, those foreclosure dollars really satisfy back taxes, and then any additional money over the back taxes and administrative fees gets put into the general fund for distribution. So there isn't a direct funding per se for foreclosures that goes right to our revenue line item, unless you're talking about foreclosures that involve bankruptcy, to which by statute we're allowed to hold back funds to offset our bankruptcy expenses, either for legal representation, filings, court proceedings, appraisal work, whatever we've got to do to shore up our position in the bankruptcy process. That can be recouped via, like I said, the delinquent interest that comes through settling a bankruptcy, whether it's in foreclosure, which typically is that way.
Thank you.
Commissioner Starrett, does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So going on from there, the other thing I want to point out is that from an FTE standpoint, we're not asking to increase any FTE. The last request for FTE increases was in 2010. And since then, the county has grown notably, both in real market value. The tax base has grown by 40% from 100 million to 140 million over that same period. We're doing significantly more than we've done in the past with fewer bodies than is required by different metrics, but also over time, we've not increased FTE to handle any of that insurge. So personnel is really the story here. We have a bunch of vacant positions. Now we're not vacant. We've got one vacant position that I'll talk a little bit about when we get into the budget itself. But other than that, if we follow that memo and those charts all the way through, the story is pretty clear. We've had a significant rise in personnel expenses. We've absorbed it in our office. This year, this budget comes to you whole, not asking for anything additional to what's in this budget 20. But we do need to maintain the staffing and the other connected functions in order to keep going. So that was it for personnel in terms of key points. The last part of the memo about materials and services. We've completed a software conversion that took 10 years to finish. When I took over, we finished. It was almost gone. It was almost gone in terms of they were going to walk away, but we were able to keep them on board. We wrapped it up in a pretty tight window. That's now 4 years behind us. We are just systematically every year getting absolutely significantly better in how we handle the program and what we're able to do with it, both the tools, how we use those tools to create efficiencies. But the lion's share of material and services is software, is licensing, and vendor relationship fees. All that's embedded in there. We'll go over some of that. If you look at it on a run rate, it really hasn't increased much. And the only significant, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. The only significant peak in valley really over a 4-year run was when we acquired vehicles for rural inspections last year. And we take that out and look at it a longer stretch of period of time. The 350, 400,000 is a very consistent, reoccurring kind of number. So if there's no questions on the memo per se, I would move on to just to highlight a couple of GLs that did have some changes, but I wanted to pause here because there's a lot of information in that memo that speaks to the current state of affairs. And if there's any questions that I can assist with, I'd be glad to help.
No, good information.
And like, you know, as I alluded to at the beginning, it's really, I'm currently the vice president of SOC. I will be president in August for a 2-year term. And the meetings we're having with every county, it's somewhat becoming a similar theme that the rate of personnel, the increase in personnel expenses is significantly outpacing what's been given through CAFA and or other revenue streams short of general fund. So nothing unique to Yamhill County in that sense. Okay, so I'll move on to the actual GL line items now. That I'd like to just highlight a couple of things. From the sheet that Ken handed out, it says it is page 99. Is that rings true for everybody?
Yep.
Okay. So first, the beginning balance, you see the drop in beginning balance. Again, that is and has been attributed to the getting fully staffed over a 2.5-year window really. And now we have 1 vacant position and I think we have 5 employees that are at step 7 and maybe 4 more that are getting longevity pay of those 5, something like that. So folks have been with us a while, folks are staying on board. We're at the higher end of the salary model, and with that, there's been a reduction in the beginning balance. The reserve accounts, I guess I'll speak to that when we get to the bottom. That's really an offset to the 2 reserves we have. Other than that, the next piece, so on GL 334.29 is the third one that refers to, and that's the CAFA grant. And what I'm trying to forecast there is really something in concert with what's happening in the clerk's office. Is as the recording fees go and as delinquent interest goes, so goes the CAFA grant and so goes the distribution. We are anticipating not a significant downward turn. 4% is not a lot year over year, but I did just get fourth quarter, or I should say, the 4th distribution. It's the fourth fiscal quarter distribution for CAFA. So we get them in quarterly payments, and we're going to be close to meeting what we thought we were going to get last year. So maybe a little more flat than 15,000 down. Probably better to put it in with a conservative number and see if for some reason the housing markets hold strong during the COVID and the recovery and everything else. That really is the material sort of downturn there. Tax warrants, we just, so now I'm on, let me go down a little bit farther here. 350.13 is tax warrants. And that is the collection of folks satisfying tax warrants. It's sort of like, in good times, we see more of them satisfied, and in struggling times, we see less. And I think the year to date on that was something close to 17 or 18 for the current year. That's why we dropped our proposed to 15. But those are the bigger numbers. When you look at it in the scope of the total revenue bucket, 15,000, another 15, 30,000 total is a number. I'm not downplaying that, but the real shift here is the lack of beginning balance to carry forward. Any questions on the revenue portion that I can answer?
Clear to me.
Oh, good.
So personnel, again, this is 95% of the budget right here. And when I look at the year-over-year increases for just salaries, not including the benefits, the benefit portion of it, it's marginal. It's $32,000 essentially is the total increase in salaries for 19 employees over the full fiscal year. Where it starts to jump and things start to get larger in terms of the increase in total personnel has to do with the benefit dollars. So it's the Medicaid, Medicare, the insurance, PERS contributions, obviously, those are all big ones. And at the end, when we take all this into consideration and we look at personnel year over year, we're not asking for an increase in FTE. The total change in personnel from last year to this year is forecasted at 3%. And if you think about what is granted in merit increases, and cost of living, that 3% is actually very reasonable, in that because we have folks maxed out on their steps, they're not getting the 5% increase, but they are getting the COLA, that kind of thing. So
If I could jump in, just to clarify just one little thing, just because Derek's shop is a member of AFSCME, which is our largest union that we're currently in contract negotiations with, that some of the numbers that you're gonna see with the personnel, and I wanna be careful, because we are in the middle of bargaining right now on a new collective bargaining agreement, but I think it would be important to note that you're gonna see further impacts in what Derek's going over, especially with his budget, whatever we end up settling on or reaching agreement on with the new collective bargaining agreement. So Derek's office is gonna be one that's going to, whatever the outcome of those negotiations are, there'll be a further impact here.
there could be additional change. Thank you, Ken. Yeah, we put a placeholder in as instructed, knowing that this was a labor negotiation year and that we might have some adjustments after that contract gets finalized. But you're right, at 95% personnel, that labor agreement will impact these numbers for sure. The starting point now is 3%, so we can see where that leads us, but you have a better idea of sort of the composition of the whole thing. So I mentioned earlier that we have the Department of Revenue staffing model projects that we need 3.75 additional bodies. I'm not asking for any of those. I don't think we do. The other technology we put into place with Econometry and Gamma Cloud have allowed for us to create some efficiencies to cover that shortage. I don't know that it covers all the bodies that we probably should be utilizing given their model, but I'm feeling confident that we've got what we need right now and the tools we need to develop them a little further. And I think we still have some efficiencies to gain with those platforms over the next maybe 3 to 5 years even, barring any sort of property tax rewrite or legislative impact. So yeah, the large increase in terms of dollars was in the benefits. The overall increase in personnel is at 3. To Ken's point, that could change with labor negotiations. Any questions on labor or personnel?
Nope.
You know what? I do want to add one more thing here. I want to give you a little bit of insight as to what the one vacant position we have right now, the commercial vacant position. The last time the county had 2 commercial appraisers was 2010 or 11. My discretion was 12. I recall there being 1 as long as I've been here. And similar to the other properties and the other appraisal bases that we've talked about in the past, in terms of we haven't done a good inventory, we haven't been in properties in 30 years, so on and so forth. We're jumping all those hurdles, getting all that caught up, getting all that done. We made huge leaps in the last 2 years in some of those efforts to get us back on track. Where we haven't been able to focus on is commercial. Primarily, it's recruiting somebody that has the skill set to meet those requirements to be a commercial appraiser. There may be an opportunity to try to build something a little more grassroots. That's going to take time. But in any event, the same thing that's happened, the attention to the fair and equitable approach to residential, urban, rural, farm referral, forest referral, we need to turn our attention to ensuring that we've got good appraisals for commercial, that the inventory is correct, that we can properly appraise and we're not leaving anything on the table or taxing something that's not there. We do see both scenarios. We see scenarios where a house was built, we missed it, or we see scenarios where they tore down 2 houses and it's now vacant and we didn't know they were gone because no one said it. So taking that same concept we've built around the residential program and now shifting towards commercial, if we get that second position filled, I can see us getting a program in place that would verify existing inventory, equalize the program, create some equalities, and then set us up for how to move forward without creating that that gap again. So just some insight on where we want to go. There is a 5-year plan in place that needs the body. We'll see what happens there. The next section, material and services, overall, it's $350,000 in expenses. If you're looking at an expense ratio or something like to personnel, it has some potential. In terms of we're constantly looking at ways to sharpen our pencil on vendor relationships, cutting down on new equipment if we don't need it, watching office supplies and all those sort of variable expenses. But the big ones that are in here, the software aerial photo project, it's 513.06, 67,000 professional services, which is 61001 and 35. The big ones that are in here are really contractual. That's not to say those contracts can't be severed. It's just saying that they're not a variable expense per se. Once the contract expires and we have to go out and look for what that looks like in a renewal, then maybe there's an option or an opportunity to look at expense. But our software providers are who they are. Their licensing, annual maintenance and licensing fees are what they are. The other ones that make up sort of those outside peripheral services that we use, CoStar and RMLS, and those are all vendor relationships we need to complete the appraisal process. So there isn't really, honestly, there's not a lot of sort of wants or need there, like fluff expenses in here might be the word, schools and conferences. All of our appraisers are licensed and are required to take continuing education to keep their license. We've cut it down to the extent we can. Travel we've cut down. Advertising, equipment. So you look across the board, everything's had a cut of some sort, barring the association memberships, which we don't really have control of that fee. That's an Osaka fee that we're part of that statewide membership. But as I look down year over year for each line item, it's either flat or I see decreases. And even after taking out the 62,000 for 3 vehicles we purchased 2 years ago, the numbers still make it by $33,000. So material and expenses are trending down to the extent that we could. We were very diligent. And the ones that are in there that are carrying over, those are the contract fees. It's not something that's really for negotiations at this program. Questions on material and services?
Yep, got it.
The last part then in the reserve section. So the first one for reserve office equipment, I think that's just being carried forward because it hasn't dropped off yet. But there's no balance in that. Nor is there a reserve for future expenditures at this point. The reserve for future software has a couple more years of software licensing in it. One of the things that I brought up, and I want to just make sure everybody's remaining mindful of, is that the software licensing is not going to go away. So while there's a reserve here today, and 2 years from now that reserve is going to be gone, the software platform we have will not be going away. I don't believe it will for 7 to 10 years, even though we just went to it. There may be some modifications and some upgrades that they want to do, but the relationship is in place, and there's only 2 players in the state, and we're not going to the other one without significant costs. So while there's a reserve here to cover a couple of years, at some point that reserve is gone and the expense continues. And that is with Harris Financial. It used to be Thomson Reuters, they sold to Harris. It's our tax, accounting, and appraisal platform. Second reserve, aerial imagery photo. So if you haven't heard from other departments, it's used by 10 departments at this point, and 1 third party, Matt Power, Water, and Light, partnered with us on the last flight to pay for some rural flight and high resolution. So that served both needs, served our needs and theirs, so that was a great partnership. But the sheriff's office, planning, roads, McMinnville, Newburgh, they're all tied into using the aerial photography across the administration too. County admin uses it, not as heavily, but we've got it out there for folks to use. The 150 that's gonna be left in there would cover the flight that we would take in 2021, the end of 2021. We originally contracted for 3 flights with 6 payments. You pay semi-annual, you pay half the flight contract each year and then fly every 2. We have 1 more left on that contract in that budget right there. And my thought at that point was, if it's going to continue, we probably got to look at a consortium or some, either it becomes an administrative service for the county, or we get some other departments who have utilized it and will continue to chip in and find a way to fund that. At $150,000, it's truly the biggest part. Well, I would say between that and the Cam and Cloud program are the 2 pieces that have allowed us to close the gap on the FTE that we are supposedly short by the state model. The high resolution imagery allows you to sit at your desk and do inspections and permit work, whereas before, everything from a $5,000 heat pump to brand new builds, you had to put somebody in a car, drive out to wherever rural property it was, take a photo, do the inspection, complete the appraisal, and come back. We probably do 30% of permits, up to 30% of permits via aerial imagery. That keeps us from having to get in the car and drive out, and it saves the time. So that's where the body cam comes from. That's it for the reserves that I show. You guys have questions about either one of those or what their intent is?
This is Rick, new member. I'd just like to compliment you. This is the kind of budget I appreciate. It looks like you're doing everything you can to minimize future costs and to find technology that saves money, and I just appreciate the effort.
Also for me, Derek, this is Rick, also for me, the what you've instilled from a department standpoint when it comes to budget, as we know how much it costs to hire and train an employee, to retain an employee. I think the fact that if you look at your own turnover rate, that it's non-existent, goes a lot to say about putting those tools in place. Yeah, tools are expensive, but they're not as expensive as personnel. And putting those tools in place and let your personnel thrive and do what they do is very important. So thank you.
Yeah, I would agree. I just want to also add, as far as staff and the assessments and taking a look at the special deferments, those types of things that hadn't been done in so long, which is amazing. It's a lot of work that was just done. So kudos to Jordan and everybody else.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Great esprit de corps over there.
And
Yeah.
one thing actually along those lines, as Commissioner Sterrett noted, I've heard from a number of people who have a lot more confidence in the tax assessment and collections apparatus in the county because of getting to the special assessments and getting to the properties. They feel like it's a more fair system now.
Good.
Yeah.
That's great. That's the intent, is it had a lot of holes in it and needed attention. And with the support of the commission and the administration at the county, we've got some great things going. So I appreciate those comments and feedback. I will share that with my staff and make sure they know that. So anything else I can provide? Any other questions that I might be able to help with?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Derek.
Yeah.
Thanks, Derek.
Thanks, Assessor.
Okay. Ken, do I just hang up now or?
Yep.
Okay, thanks everyone.
Bye.
Have a great day.
Bye.
Be safe.
See you there.
I swear I didn't pay him to say the thing about the consortium.
Oh, he's talking about that.
We talked about that a lot.
We're waiting for, I believe the clerk is going to be the next person to join us. Just a highlight that this is his office with everything that he's talked about, this is one where we do have a $429,000 ask in order for him to balance his budget. So it'll be on your deliberation list.
Assessor or?
Yeah, the assessor's office.
Okay.
So this was another one that when he built his budget with the current materials and he was short revenue compared to what his set discretionary was. So in order to present a balanced budget, I went ahead and balanced the 1002, but it's something you're gonna deliberate on tomorrow and review, because he is, running short on revenue for 429,000.
Ouch.
And there is the clerk.
Don't look so sober, Brian.
Very, very serious individual.
It's kind of like a wormhole.
Very
Yeah.
official. He looks
Yeah,
very
it's,
official.
The fade behind fade factor.
Yeah, he's been working on that because he's been waiting.
You look too sober.
All right. So our next is our county clerk, Brian Van Bergen, who is here. And are you ready to go, Brian?
I think I am, yeah. Can you guys hear me or should I use my cell phone?
Oh, we can hear you.
Sweet, if you guys are ready.
We're ready.
You're ready.
Excellent. Good afternoon, commissioners. Caroline.
Hi.
Ken. Rick, good to meet you.
Thank you.
Danny, nice to have you back.
Good to see you.
Lindsay, nice to have you back.
Hello.
There are not very many changes to our budget. There are no planned changes for FB2. There's not a wild difference in beginning balance last year to this, not a huge drop off in recordings or the other essential functions of our office, but there are a few things to note. So we start on page 102 in your budget documents. The vast majority of all of our budget documents are in Fund 10. There's some sprinkled through Fund 12 and some remnants in 40 that we are considering asking next year to roll into one of the other funds. So if you're still here next year, we'll talk a little bit about rolling Fund 40 into one of the others. Just as a small caveat, the Fund 40 is specifically designed to help us prepare for election equipment upgrades. So it's not something we typically dip into, but once or twice every 10 years. So some things of note, rolling through the initial Fund 10 and some of the revenue bits. One of the things that is off and will be off this year is the dip in marriage licenses that we've experienced with COVID since shutting our doors. Marriage licenses and passports have dropped to next to nothing. But on the flip side, property recordings have been better than expected. So even though we expect to lose several $1,000s in marriage license fees and passport fees and photos, will likely break even, as you will, with the increased revenue that we did not expect in property recordings. So line item 10, 15, 322, 21, marriage license fees will be lower this year, but we'll catch up again next year. Line item 10, 15, 341, 04 is our recording fees. That is the vast majority of our office's revenue. We have time today, we can dive in a little bit about what that means. We're 93% self-funded, So this election that we're conducting at this moment, the presidential primary, almost all our costs to conduct this election are paid for literally through these recording fees. So we don't get any reimbursement from the feds, we don't get any reimbursement from the state, we don't get any reimbursements for any of the cities. The only entities that will pay a small portion of this primary election for looking right now will be the fire jurisdictions in Willamette and Hamilton. And those will be less than $1,000 each, even though this election will cost us $100,000. So the passports and passport photos will be lower than expected this year, but rolling into next year, we do expect those to be healthy still because next year's Real ID Act compliance with the Oregon driver's licenses impacts how many people will want passports. But we do expect that to be healthy again. And those two line items, 15, 341, 17, and 20. So they'll be a little bit off from our initial projections last year, but it should be back up again next year. Any questions on revenue on Fund 10? Personnel in Fund 10 really, really similar to this current fiscal year. We don't plan any major changes in our upcoming year. So really, it's just those expenses that we expect to bounce up with the negotiations that Ken Hopper was just talking about a minute ago. Any questions about Personnel Fund 10? No? So far? Good answer. Thanks, Casey.
I'm with you.
So the next big bit is our materials, our supplies and that sort of thing. Fund 10, no huge changes year over year in our supplies, expenses. The biggest change between this year that we're in today and next year is next year we do get to produce an election where we do get some reimbursements. Not terribly fair for school districts and fire districts, in my opinion. They get to shoulder the burden of the expenses when they have an election. It's just the cities and the state and the feds don't get to share. So next year we have special district elections that include school and fire districts. So that's why you'll see a jump in the election reimbursement, and then some of the expenses will correlate. But not big changes year over year. Any questions on expenses for Fund 10?
Brian, the new law where postage is paid for, that doesn't affect us at all. It's just the state.
Correct. Lacey's referring to the new postage paid ballot return envelopes. Y'all should have received your ballot packets in the mail already. Inside that ballot packet should include a ballot return envelope, a ballot, and a secrecy. You'll see a big change in the layout of that return envelope, and that's because they are prepaid or postage paid. So anyone that drops their ballot off in the mail starting January 1st, 2020, moving forward, the state picks up the tab of that postage coming back to us. So the state is being charged 60.6 cents per, 60.6 cents per ballot coming back to us. That mechanism that's in place right now is there is a single statewide postage permit funded by the Secretary of State's office, and then 36 sub-accounts. So those ballots are physically coming to the Portland Post Office, getting sorted. Those ballots about to the 36 counties, and our ballots arrive at the McMinnville Post Office, and then the Grange ones.
Okay, and then you said going forward, starting next year, any special districts, so school has a bond or whatever, they're going to have to pay for the election, their own election.
The special districts always have to reimburse their counties. They've never been charged by the state.
Okay.
So unless something changes, the school district should not see an increase in their election expenses. It's really convoluted. I hope that we get a chance to speak again with our special districts before that happens next year. Many of them will think that their expenses will go up because of the postage paid, but the only way they will see an increase is if the Secretary of State's office attempts to charge them for that postage next year, which I don't expect they will, because that would be a completely new change in the law, and I haven't heard any rumblings of that changing. So
Oh,
the
I'm referring-
2021 fee to the Newburgh School District should be really similar to the 2020 or 19 fee from our office. Does that make any sense at all?
Okay, maybe I misunderstood. You mentioned something about fire and schools going forward will have to shoulder more of the burden.
I may have misspoke.
Okay.
The schools and fire always pay.
Okay. Maybe I misunderstood. Sorry.
Okay.
Carry on.
I know what you're talking about.
Any other questions on that?
Looks good.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You betcha. Fund 12, small, Fund 12 is a special, allocation from our department to archive documents, whatever. You have a project going on as we speak, where we are converting, years worth of film to a digital version. And that is time consuming and costly, but it's something that will help us and help our customers moving forward. They'll be able to search documents quicker and be able to get those documents right the first time, since they'll know exactly what they're looking at before they request a certificate. That's something that we will have considerable progress on this year. Not quite sure if we're going to wrap it up by the end of this calendar year, but we're shooting for it. Any questions on Fund 12?
With me.
Good. Fund 40 is even simpler. So we have no plans of spending any money in funds, out of Fund 40 this next year. Theoretically, what could happen if the feds and the state get their, it's not just the stimulus money, it's two packages of extra money for securing elections that have been passed from the feds. The money for securing elections is actually heading towards the state, but the state must agree to pay 20% of whatever the feds are allocating. So there is a slim chance that Yamhill County could see some of that federal money to secure elections, but we honestly don't expect that to happen, considering all that's happening with COVID and the state response. The chances are so good that the state will use all that funds to secure elections moving forward. I don't anticipate getting anything, but we do have a line item ready in case something does happen. Because we can't spend it if you guys don't let us do it. Just don't see it happening this year. Questions?
Just, maybe I'll add a little bit of information about 4015, because like Brian mentioned, we were having discussions about how long we continue to have the 4015, these funds in Fund 40. Typically, what we'll do for departments that may have a large capital project, that they're contributing funds, but also there may be discretionary funds that are coming from the general fund. We'll put those into a Fund 40 account for a specific project. And if you look at 17-18 was the last time there were any funds transferred in from the general fund into that, and that was for the voting equipment. And so right now, the only funds that are going into this budget are what Brian is putting in from 10-15. And it's not a requirement that we have to necessarily keep the funds here, because you can have capital projects within the other funds. And so that was discussions we were having, that we may come to a point that we want to just zero this out, move the funds to 10-15. We can hold it in a restricted reserve or a capital line or whatever he's going to do to fund for a project there. But we're not contributing additional general funds into a line for a specific project. And so that is something that we can do that now if there was interest in doing that, or something that we can build into next year's budget and have discussions next year. There's no harm in having it here and it's available, show project, like Brian was describing, that we can spend it, and it could be something that we can flag and discuss next year. So I just wanted to clarify why he had this separate fund and fund for it, and because it's, there's a few projects that will handle it this way.
Good clarification.
All right.
Well, thank you, clerk.
Thank you. I should clarify one thing, however, if you guys have 2 seconds. The assessor who chimed in before me made one minor little error in that our department staff was actually the best. He was really close, the difference between 1 and 2 is not far off. It's just,
The difference between 1 and 2 is a big difference.
Thank you for clarifying that.
I'm
We
glad you
appreciate
clarified
that.
Brian, because I always looked at you as both very
that's what we
excellent.
do, we count things.
Right, if you're not first, you're last.
Right.
Pretty much.
If you're not first, you're last.
Yeah, it's binomial.
Appreciate it. Thanks a
Bye,
lot.
Brian.
Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Cheers.
And Derek's.
Hello?
Ah.
And the assessor has returned.
I don't get one to talk to the best office. I just thought I'd come on.
Checking out the competition. I
Oh
understand.
my gosh.
Oh, that's funny.
It does have some benefits.
Should have asked him what events he actually did letter in track.
Yeah, really.
Oh, we've
Those
talked.
All right, so I sent a message to Christian, so we're just waiting, unless Christian's watching the YouTube channel. Please join us.
There he is.
There he is.
All
Just like
right.
that.
Hey, there he is.
We're getting in the spirit of this.
Thank
Good
goodness county
afternoon.
council's here.
Don't be streaming the soccer at the same time.
No, there's no soccer to stream, unfortunately. Hey, I might not be able to beat either Derek or Brian in my background, but I'm gonna take a shot at beating him with my headgear.
Nice, very nice.
You can see that's an official fairly hard hat.
That's the real item.
It worked. So, afternoon, everybody. If there are no other questions, we can jump right in. I don't expect it to take very long at all. I spoke with Commissioner Starrett about this earlier today. I do have an add-back request that should be reflected in each of your budget binders. There's not a significant change in our revenues from year to year. Our personnel is unchanged. We have 4 FTE still from year to year. Our personnel costs look like they're going to jump by about a little over 2%. But the add-backs are in the materials and services. And the add-back request in your book is in the professional services line. In order to balance, I had to zero that line out. And I'm asking for a add-back of $25,000 in that line, which is the same amount that line was funded in the last year. And for those of you that are new to the committee, that's a line that we use to pay for outside counsel services for specific legal needs. For example, over the last year, we used outside counsel to assist us with a couple of highly specific insurance-related issues. We paid for outside counsel help on property tax litigation. We used part of that to pay outside counsel in a couple of outstanding labor grievances where council have been helping us in prior years, and those matters are still unresolved. And then we had some costs related to specific litigation that was resolved just before the end of last year, but wasn't billed until we got into 1920. So that's what that fund is generally used for. I don't expect to need more than what we're asking for this coming year. You'll see there was a higher usage of that amount last year. That had essentially to do with the litigation bill that came due, but I don't expect anything similar to that going forward into 2021. So 25,000, I believe, would be sufficient in that line. And then I did forgot to mention this, but I did notice in central supplies and publications and dues, those numbers, I believe, must have been reduced from last year to this year's proposed budget, beginning to zero it out. I do expect those costs to be closer to what we had adopted last year. So I'm sorry for bringing this up now, but I would ask that line number 1025 5101 be funded at the 2343 level that it was this year, and that the 1025 513.03 line also be funded at the $4,000 level that it was at this year. So if you add all that together, it's 28,500. And if you add that to the total for materials and services, and my math is right, and I'm a lawyer, not an accountant, but it would bring the total budget up to 646.79, which is not quite 2% over last year. And that's pretty much all I have, unless folks have specific questions about any of the line items.
Christian, it's Lindsay. I have a question about the professional services cost. You said it was outside counsel. Are you hiring outside counsel based on a workload issue, or are you hiring it based on a specific issue that you can't handle internally based on the subject matter?
Yeah, it's an expertise-driven decision. And we've had discussions with the board about this in the past. If, for example, I had to familiarize myself with the specific issues involved in property tax litigation, for example, where our outside counsel attorney could do that in 3 to 4 hours, it would probably take me multiples of 10 of that. I would just have to spend more time because I am not a subject matter expert in property tax litigation. We've been very fortunate to be able to work with an attorney in that specific area who was formerly the county counsel in Deschutes County, and who did property tax foreclosure litigation and property tax litigation generally for Deschutes County, because it's very difficult to find someone in that field who has expertise from the government side. Right? There are more attorneys who represent plaintiffs in property tax litigation than there are individuals who have experience from the government side. So she's been very helpful as an example. But yes, it is an expertise-driven decision, which has a knock-on effect for resources, right? Because being able to utilize them frees up additional time for myself and the other attorneys in the office to do the rest of the work that we have to do.
And then yes, and then a follow-up question, because I noticed we have had quite a bit of those expenses in the past few years. Has any of the outside counsel been devoted to the Yamhill West Sider Trail, either with the land acquisition or with the bridge construction issue?
Not with the land acquisition or with the bridge, but we did have a landowner along the trail who challenged the county's ship in the trail. And in that litigation, we did work with Union Pacific, and there was cost for retaining their involvement in that litigation. That was part of this cost for last year. Yes.
Okay, and that was fiscal year
So that was the
1920?
litigation resolved in April of 2019, if I'm not mistaken. The bill that we actually received from UP for their involvement in that case, we didn't receive until we were into fiscal year 1920.
Okay,
And
so
that's
it's
when-
tech,
that's when we paid.
so it's technically part of the 43,212.
It is.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Well, thanks, Kristen. I don't have any more questions.
I don't have any.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Christian.
All right, thanks, Christian.
All right. We're done?
Yep.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, Justin's here.
All right, hey, Justin. Yeah, you gotta mute the TV.
Just did.
All right.
He's still watching, he just muted.
Because they've been watching on the YouTube on the
Yeah.
TV, so that would affect. Justin is here and you're going to do the law library.
All right, I'll go ahead and get into that. So Fund 1426, this is on page 95. Just a brief introduction to this fund. This fund lays out the financial plan for the law library, which is physically located in the basement of the courthouse next door to you in room 32. No general fund monies are provided to this fund. Revenue is provided by the state through court filing fees. So the revenue figure in line 350.10, the 77,991, that's the number provided by the state, and it's given to us every other year. So for illustration purposes, you'll notice, looking at the history, that this revenue figure is the same as the year-to-date actual in the current fiscal year, and that the 2 fiscal years prior share identical revenue figures. The law library has only one employee who works 0.4 FTE, and they're mainly just modest changes over the current fiscal year to this budget. The largest adjustment, which is still relatively minor, was a reduction in anticipated beginning balance, which was primarily reflected in a reduction to publications and dues down in the materials and services category. This is not anticipated to impact material we update throughout the year and have available in the library. As you can see in line 510.01, we are able to still budget well above the year-to-date. What's that?
No questions.
Oh, sorry. I think I was just hearing myself echo. So yeah, we're still able to budget well above the year-to-date expenses. Are there any questions on this one?
Nope.
No,
No?
All right.
All right, thanks, Justin.
So,
thanks, Justin.
before Justin signs out,
I can move on to treasurer if you want.
did you want to do the treasurer or did you want me to do that one? If you want to do it, you volunteered.
Okay.
Can I ask a question?
7.
Oh, just a moment.
Our treasurer is an elected position, correct?
It is.
Is there a reason that the treasurer has not shown up for budget committee presentations for the past 2 years?
That would be a question for the treasurer. To be honest, I've gotten emails that, he's provided us, some guidance on her, bond and pool interest earnings. But basically has declined or hasn't participated in the budget portion of this and just, the budget that's been created and something that we've worked on, it's been a real status quo budget. That's all I can say, and it's,
For the record, I just want to state that especially this year, when we know that projections are down potentially 50%, I think it's pretty offensive that he's not showing up to give his presentation.
Has there been a reason? Has there been a stated reason for not coming to the board, to budget committee?
outside of the emails, I think Justin and I have both gotten emails earlier in the year. Okay
Not going to
with
attend.
go ahead and building the budget based on what it was and to proceed. So maybe I'll take this one. Okay. So I'll just, again, what we have built in here is essentially a status quo budget as far as what the compensation committee has approved as far as the salary for the treasurer, plus the roll-ups, and then the other portions of the supplies and materials that are built in down below. The one thing that I will highlight, we did increase the department equipment, and we made some just minor increases, and then also the travel expense. Well, we tried to build in just a couple smaller items because also recognizing that I think everyone is aware that Mike Green's not running again for treasurer, and so there's 3 candidates that filed for the office, and so we wanted to build in some appropriations in here, so whoever's coming into the office, has some funds if they need to change or do something different with the office, or at least build some of that into this, and so that's what we did.
Yeah.
But other than that, it's a status quo budget, and we figured there's, with the next person coming in office and maybe more discussion on, what this budget. And then also, we'll modify like we've done in prior years, depending on outcome of discussions with the compensation committee tomorrow, whatever that outcome is. This is one of those that if there's any changes or increases made to the salary line or anything associated with that, we'll also have to increase the discretionary revenue to match that, because this is 100% discretionary revenue. Mike is still, diligently working on investments, and he handles the investment portfolio for the county and has done a fantastic job with that. I know we have some challenges right now with the status of the economy and what the projections are going to look like, going into next budget year. So there's going to be some challenges with that. So.
Has he provided any specifics as to what he's seeing?
I think the last communications that we were getting, he's looking at where we build the budget. He's seeing we should probably be budgeting, like I said yesterday in the presentation, probably halving what we had budgeted, or the original projections are budgeted for pool and bond.
Yeah.
Probably halving that 50%.
We get updates pretty regularly from him on that.
More.
More regularly now than what used to be like a quarterly.
I was just going to say, I would have appreciated asking him those questions, being that he is an elected official.
I wrote down, and I didn't write down who it was. I believe, I don't remember who it was, but they made the comment of, we put these funds somewhere where they make better interest. Do you remember who? There was a guy, I didn't write down, but there was a couple $100,000 in his bond, in that section. And he made the comment of, we put this someplace else which makes better interest. Is that, do departments have the ability to do that, or does the treasurer, the only one that has the treasurer? Okay.
The treasurer's the one that
So maybe
does
he
that.
was just speaking like, I don't know.
And Mike Barnhart, who is our finance manager and is appointed as the deputy treasurer, just, because a lot of the functions, there's a lot of functions that occur that Mike handles as well. It's ultimately the treasurer looks at most of our funds we keep in our LGIP, which is the state local government investment pool. Is where we hold funds there. We also move funds into our local bank account. We'll do transfers there to access the funds to handle any payments or account processing. That's the one we're always careful about how much the balance, because we earn a lot more than in our LGIP. Historically, we earn a lot more, but we've seen the interest rates are dropping with our LGIP account. And then the treasurer also has a set limit, that's set by the board on how much is available for investments and what he uses for the investments.
In addition to LGIP.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, I wrote it down with question about treasure next to it just from that comment. So
Sure.
that's-
And that's the treasurer's budget. Any questions?
There you go. No further questions.
Thank you. And was Joe joining us? Was that the next one, or am I missing one that you were gonna cover right now?
No, yeah, next would be, the 40 budget. I told him I was gonna go over to his place, but, I can jump in and cover 4027 and he can join
Actually,
in.
let's do this. If you were gonna walk over there, why don't you do that? And I will, I'm looking through the list right now. Maybe there's another small budget that I can do while you're doing that.
Okay.
You just have to walk across the street. Great. I'm looking- Looks like we've covered a lot of them.
I'm gonna say, I don't have
80
much that isn't checked.
80-038 is the one I can think of that I know we haven't, but
80, I think that 80 deserves its own time.
a walk across the street is not enough time for that.
No, I thought about jumping into that one.
Yeah.
It won't take him very long to get over there, but our next one is going to be on page 111, which will be the facilities budget, and that's what Mr. Gilmore and Justin are gonna go over as a team. Or everyone needs a 5 minutes.
Yeah.
5-minute break. Let's recess 5 minutes.
What was 80? What was 80? IT?
It's insurance reserve tab number. or
Oh, okay.
tab name.
Okay.
But it's like all the different insurance.
Okay.
It looks simple, and then you start realizing there's a
Then
lot.
you start to-
Fund 80 is not simple.
you
What
get
is
into
that?
it, It's not
That's
as simple as
insurance
it
reserves.
Oh, I don't know how you guys do this all day long.
for 2.5 days, yeah.
Long stretch.
It's all right, some counties do it, this.
Yeah.
And then once a quarter, they do have a 2-day, once a quarter, to verify all the budgets and where they are, and amended budgets they have to do. they get like 8 days a year doing this. Not me, thank you.
It seems like they would call for hazard pay or something.
It does, basically. Ken, not only are you a good county administrator, you're a very good diplomat too.
I'm sorry, what was that? It was just a joke.
Well, I drove by Thai country and it definitely is open. People were out there picking up.
Standing in line waiting.
I went there, we're gonna go there tonight, because last night, the line, I didn't order before, I was down there looking at a project, and I was like, I'll just go over there.
Discover.
Yeah, it's like the line was down the road, I'm like, all right, so we're gonna go tonight.
Or
We'll
call ahead.
it in.
Yeah.
Yes, I didn't wanna wait. Yeah. Yeah.
It's gonna be interesting to see what the city of Yamhill determines with closing down their treatment and the food restaurants and everything.
Well, there's so much of it with the state requirements of 50% occupancy, and everybody's like, talking with Ricky at 411, he's like, how do I open? I got to buy all the food, have all the servers, have everybody, for the way his place is designed. He's like, I can't.
Well, you rent 100% of the space.
Yes,
You know what I'm saying? And so
Yeah.
some of those costs you just can't.
that's what he's saying. He goes,
Yeah.
I
Your
just,
fixed costs, no matter what
That's
you
right.
do, you have.
yeah. And he just said, I don't know how I open it 50%, and us at the Oak. And then they're requiring you to get everybody's name that comes in. It's like,
So far, it's just a suggestion,
Yeah.
but it's every business. It's not just
Yes.
restaurants.
Yeah.
And bars. I just want to.
Yeah. And it just makes it really challenging to serve people and get,
cannabis stores.
You have to track names for
Yeah,
cannabis
yeah, because you can't buy more than a certain amount on a certain day. So
per day or
Yeah,
like
per day.
Okay.
yeah, and then it
I
goes
didn't know
away
that.
at the end of the day. It's all digital. So yeah.
Then they sweep it.
But yeah, Danny, have you heard what Commissioner Olson was talking about
which,
with the I can't close these off, but the proposal to essentially close off parts of Third Street
no.
and
Let
expand.
vendors, businesses downtown actually extend out from their front door
Oh, I
and
heard,
outside.
I did hear that a
Go
little bit.
spaces.
hot
Like-
mics and
They have to still
proposal
maintain,
for-
they still have to maintain everything they did.
Yeah.
But they figured since, like, the community plan, if you decide to do that, he could take up so much space on the street and moved off for him, and the waiting staff still has to wear the masks and everything. But nobody else in the state board is trying to get to move to all outside dining. But
The
if
gap
they-
is getting closer though, is narrowing, so.
Well, and right now it's kind of hit and miss.
It is, it's exactly that, it's hit and miss.
Weather and stuff.
Well,
Wait, what? Isn't it always just like slightly partly sunny downtown?
I guess it's always hit and
My-
miss.
our
It never
challenge
changes.
right now
that's a good
is-
point. It's always hit and
the
miss.
employees. I've got employees who are making more money right
Mhm.
now than they've ever made in their life.
Yeah,
And
Yeah.
how do
They're getting
you,
that $600.
yeah, so
plus their-
who wants to come back to work? So
Right.
it's like, bring someone back for part-time work. No one wants to come as a waiter or a bartender. No one wants to
Well, I
come back
think
and
the
not get
state-
any tips.
Yeah, I think the state's gonna address, they're gonna have to address that.
Yeah.
How do you get those people that lost their job or gone unemployment, let's get that $600 extra month? And how do you tell them, oh, sorry, you are going back to, you got a job offered to you at the same rate, you're going back to work,
Yeah.
because your employment is stopping.
so some restaurants are saying we won't be able to open till August till their employment runs out.
I know, and that's the part of That's a big issue.
And some states are saying, if you have your job and you don't go back, you lose your unemployment.
Not only lose it, but you'd have to pay it back.
Have to pay it back if they,
If they're
No.
found that they had offered a job and they
Oh.
didn't take it.
oh,
Mm-hmm.
Now, what employer is going to turn people in?
Well, exactly.
Yeah, it puts us in a,
No,
we're gonna lose our
No win.
employees. I mean, it just makes.
yeah.
It just seems like it wasn't thought out real well. The $600 kicker.
Yeah,
I mean,
Well, and then there's folks that haven't even received anything for 3 weeks, so.
They bought a lot of them, they received it for another 3 weeks.
yeah, we've got a couple of people that work for us that filed at the same time. Same situation, same, work for us, same business. They filed and they haven't received, and they can't get anything. They obviously they call in, they wait on, they're just frustrated because they'll wait on
All day.
hold, and then it'll just cut them off.
mhm.
You know,
And then you gotta
I
start over.
talked to some of our legislators about it, because I asked a question, I think it was in one of our town halls.
Mhm.
Yeah, with all the additional workers, they have put on, why don't they just expand the hours like, to midnight or to, 24 hours a day? And then they still have the cost for additional workers. But like in Salem, we still pay them for years to put those 300 of the new workers in. Can you imagine the cost of building these equipment?
Yeah.
And so they're in a building, Hamlin during the day. When at night. it's
Did he
other
go
buildings,
across the
it's
street?
No,
Yeah,
he
it
went
makes
back.
sense,
Oh,
Rick.
okay.
What's the matter with you? That makes sense.
Technical
It
issue.
makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
Yeah, but it makes sense, so why
Yeah.
Why
would they do it?
Yeah.
He's got a little piercing in his
Our
ear.
neighbor
Oh,
was,
no.
our neighbor was the same, when she called and filed twice, waiting for the recall. First time, she never got the call, so she called back in. Second time, she said, we're trying to transfer to a representative, and the phone went down.
Oh, no.
All right.
I'm ready to go if anybody else
We're ready
is.
if we wanna-
Let's go for
You're
it.
back.
Let's resume.
All right, so the next portion of the budget we're gonna go over is facilities maintenance, so on page 111. You got Joe with you, or are you gonna present it?
I was going to jump into 4027 and Joe's going to follow up with his portion of 40 facilities maintenance.
So which one are we
So
on?
what page are we on?
115.
Of what tab?
Mhm. Yeah, it's
Facilities.
behind facilities, yeah.
Oh,
It's just kind of in there. 4027 capital improvement.
Right before IT. Starting 3 pages before IT.
Page 115. All right.
4027, revenue for this division is collected through internal charges, charged to departments. This is a flat amount. Those charges are split between the maintenance budget, 4016, and capital improvements fund 4027. So the funds in 4027 are used for major remodel projects in our existing inventory of buildings. Personnel and materials and services are really status quo this year. The most significant expenses that you see year after year in materials and service are principal payments and several interfund loans paid out of line 78.34 at the amount of $228,252. These include the FFC bond payoff, state loan payoff, and Stern block. Then if you go to the following page there. This amount here, the 878,826. This is what we have budgeted to use for capital projects next fiscal year. And we'll be coming back to the CIP list in the next month or two to request authorization of the list that this fund will provide for. Any questions on 4027?
Again, this is what we have for, this is typically remodel projects, like you heard the district attorney talking about the remodel that he's been approved. a lot of times what the capital improvement list that the board approves, it's the optimistic list when we adopt it for a year, and it's usually carried over into the next year. But again, so we have projects that carry over the fiscal year, but, this is, we're usually out in front of it with the funds that we have set aside. It's not a large amount. And I would just, again, highlight that one of our major projects that we had underway this year was that space needs analysis, which is doing, but part of that was an evaluation of all of our campus buildings and, working on a plan and recognizing that what we have in here, depending on the outcome of that plan, and, if they're calling us new facilities or new buildings, that's gonna be a much larger discussion that we're gonna have, because, we don't have a lot of funds that are set aside or dedicated for a major new building or a major capital improvement, so, all right. I see Joe has joined us as well. Joe Moore is our facilities manager. So if we want to go to page 111. 111.
Yeah.
All right, I think we're there. So if you want to introduce yourself and talk just a little overview of your department, and then you can jump into the budget.
All right. Well, my name is Joe Moore. Been with the county now for about 22 years, almost 22 years. We are a department of about, I think there's 11 of us. We handle all the different facility needs, smaller projects, we take care of all landscaping. And we don't really have the bandwidth to jump into the large projects. We try to do as much in-house as possible, but we do end up having to contract, we try to do in-house where we can, but it's just, we just don't have the people to do it.
All right.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead if you want to jump into 4016.
Okay, so we'll start with 4016, on the revenue lines. It got a little bit changed around this year. Ken's already talked a little bit about it, how we moved some money around, that used to come into 4016 through, corrections, and we kind of, but I'll let Ken explain that.
It's easy. We moved it to 4116 and 4041.
Yeah. Other than that, the revenue, there is a new line on the revenue, 36204, it's rent, and what that is, once Public Works built their new building out off Lafayette Avenue, we took over their old building where the OSU extension office is. And so now that rent's paid to us, and so that's what that line there represents, is what they pay throughout the year. Any questions on the revenue?
Nope.
Okay, on the personnel lines, you'll see that changed a little bit. We moved, 0.4 of, Jessica, my secretary, into the jail budget, 4116. She does quite a bit of coordinating, with our ticket system for both the county side and the jail, so we moved part of her over there. On our specialist, line 40211, we moved 2% of him over into the jail, or 0.2, I mean, over jail. He will come over there, help them out from time to time with, specialty work like electric, with things requiring a license. Then I put on, 40348, put 0.1 of me into that fund.
Because
On,
if I could jump in, Joe, because it'll make a lot more sense when we look at 4116. But one of the things that we had done with the shifting, because again, some of the 1145 funds were going into 4016, but Joe oversees projects and maintenance in the jail. He has 3 of the staff that work full-time in the jail, and Until now, none of that FTE was reflected in the jail budget. So we fixed the concerns the sheriff had with the 1145 monies and having those not going into this budget, but going into maintenance and the jail capital budget. But we also thought it was important to ensure that we have the FTEs for what Joe just went through with his support staff, with his management, and then also the specialist, the licensed specialist who does a lot of work and a lot of overlap and has to oversee some of the work because it's being done under the general permit that may be occurring in the jail that falls into Joe's office. We transferred portions of that FTE over into 4116, which you'll see it on the other side. All right. Thanks, Joe.
Go ahead. Then in the line 40356, you'll see an increase in FETs there. We're requesting to add another position, permanent position to the crew this year. We could probably add a couple more and keep them working, but being realistic, one person would be huge, adding one more person to our crew. The rest of the personnel line just reflects all the roll-ups, dealing with benefits and everything else. Are there any questions in there that I can answer?
And I would just highlight that the FTE addition that he's done here is within his current revenue stream. So there's nothing flexible with that. So it's not an additional request. It's just within his current revenue.
All right, well, material and services, pretty much stayed the same as last year. Right now, probably the one that's slowly trending up is gonna be 67002 and 67001. Those are all of our utilities are paid out of 67002, and then garbage services and waste services are all paid out of 67001. Those fees have been increasing over the years, and so far we're okay on that. We did raise a couple years ago, we raised our rental charge a little bit to reflect the cost of those costs creeping up. And then down at the bottom, 80103, maintenance equipment. We've been putting away money for, it's been a few years now. Each year kind of just rattle some money. We pulled it out this year and spend it for two items. One is going to be for a forklift here. And then the second one is for what's called a fusion splicer. It is for doing fiber optic work. And then you can see down there at the very bottom, 99029, it's a reserve line where we added some money into that for a future boom lift that we'd like to purchase.
Joe, can I go back to supplies, materials and supplies, services? Sure. Forgive me, what's the difference between contractor services and contract services?
Oh, okay.
They're both 35,000, so.
Contract 61102, that would be contracts that we have with somebody, like an alarm monitoring service. We have some service contracts on some of our big HVAC equipment that are on the roof. So that would be our contracts.
Perfect, yeah.
Contractor services would be if I call a contractor in to do a specific project.
Okay, sounds great. Thanks.
Any more questions on 4016?
Doesn't look like it.
No, that looks good.
Thank you.
If not, we can move on to 4011.
Is
Next page.
Page 113.
Jail facilities maintenance.
Sorry about that. Looking at the revenue lines, The source of revenue here is a internal transfer from the general fund and then a transfer over from community corrections. And you can see as we go down into the personnel lines, starting with the first one, 40102, where we added in Jessica, the secretary, 0.4 of her. 0.2 of on next line there, 0.2 of our specialist. And then down at 40348, 0.1 of me. And then again, the roll-ups are all reflected in there. And we have 3 guys that are pretty much dedicated to the jail. Right now, we have a vacant position. We have to fill.
Clean.
Any questions on that one? All right, going down to materials and services, pretty much static there, nothing's really changed. There has used line 511109 as kind of a catch-all. This one's not broke out the way that I have my main budget broke out, where I have, like you asked about the contract and contractor lines. Everything kind of falls into that 511102 there. And that's about it. Going back to 2016, when I said there were about 11 of us all together. You should say that includes the 3 persons that are dedicated here to the jail.
Looks good, Joe. Thanks.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Joe.
All right.
I don't know how you manage to get done with the crew you have. You must either be rewarding them right or something's happened, because some of that crew is kind of shaky, you know.
Oh. He's got. I think I know what you're talking about.
He's got a really outstanding crew. And
He does very
they
outstanding.
do accomplish a lot. When you
Mhm.
look at the size of the campus, the variety of buildings that we have. Joe loves historical buildings. This courthouse, the grounds, the transit center. We've been adding quite a bit and from a lot of his department, and his team has done an outstanding job. In keeping up with a laundry list, a really long list of projects, and keeping the facilities open and running. So,
Things right for work.
yes, they do.
You never see them standing in one place, that's for sure.
No.
They're always moving.
All right. Hey, thanks, Joe.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you, Joe.
Thanks, guys.
Good background too. That's like a custom one. I think he downloaded for that. Yeah.
Let's see, the one thing I think I can go over really quickly, so this is like a 5-second budget, is on page 117, it's still in front 40. It's 4083, which is the postage machine. This is one because we have the mail room. So it'll be right before IT, it's the page right before. It's easy to miss because it's just a couple lines. We have no planned expenditures out of this line. We've been carrying forward a balance of 35,000. We haven't added any additional funds. We're still holding that in a reserve. This was a project that we actually did in 1819. We purchased a new postage machine for our mail room, which is just down the hall. And so we're still holding on to funds. We charge postage rates and we built this. And so if we need to do anything while with the mail room, we have funds available, but we're not planning on spending any of this. But that's a really quick rundown on that. So this is a primer to get ready for IT, and I haven't seen Shane sign in yet.
Probably, Shane's probably trying to figure out how to use the hardware.
Yeah, he's helped so many people in this county. Wait a minute, what button did I push? It's amazing how many laptops and computers their team has sent out and set up. Yeah. The thing I thought was really funny is when I see like general countywide emails from IT that talk about how to set things up, that, you know, they were questions I went through in January of 2019. They're like, I know your problem. I know the exact one.
All right.
Sweet.
You are not muted.
All right, that's a good thing.
How's things in Pacific City?
Pardon me?
How's things in Pacific City?
It's great. Actually, really good. Really enjoying it. Thank you.
All
All
right,
right.
we're ready for IT presentation. So this is Shane Hoffman. He's our IT manager. And I'll let him take it from there to give an introduction and overview for IT.
Okay, thank you, Ken. So welcome administration, board of commissioners, budget committee members, and welcome to the 2020-21 Information Technology and Telecommunications Budget Presentation. I'm going to begin with 1017, so if you return to page 120 in your budget books, we will begin. All right, we'll start with revenue. And I thought for our new member, Lindsay, I thought I'd just maybe explain a few of these accounts, just so she knows what they are. If we look at the 334.29 assessment taxation grant, that's a portion of the capital grants that are received from the tax assessor. And 341.55 computer access, that's monies we receive from title companies for access. And 3801 CO internal revenue, that's table 11 of the budget instructions, and that's comprised of network charges plus the health and human services and correction transfers to my department for computer system analysts support, essentially. Are there any questions on revenue?
Yeah, so just to clarify, with 1017, he has a mix of the Fund 10 departments do not pay network fees. He gets a discretionary allocation out of the general fund straight into 1017, but the non-general fund departments all pay network fees because they're not, you know, they're
Makes sense.
you know, so they pay him directly, and then they're also paying for a couple of dedicated programmer positions that provide support only to HHS. They don't work in other areas, and so that's all included in those fees. All right, go ahead, Shane.
Thank you, Ken. Any other questions? Okay, we'll move on to personnel. So a couple of changes here. I'm asking for board approval for one reclass, and that's for John Burns to be promoted to a senior systems administrator. I created a memo for your perusal indicating the business drivers for the reclass. And if we look at 403.50, that reflects the new senior systems administrator position. 403.52, programmer analyst, if you look there, it's a 0.25 FTE. And this is going to be a new programmer analyst position that's going to provide some redundancy and support for our Health and Human Services Senior Programmer Analyst. And HHS, Health and Human Services, will be transferring funds for this position. We look a little further down at 42 extra help. I have $28,000 set aside there. And I've recently hired a temporary part-time person to help our desktop support. And their primary role is helping getting up to speed on our deployments, our imaging process for deploying laptops and desktops as they need being replaced, as well as helping them with office moves. And that gives us the ability to do some more cross-training and try to keep up with tickets and focus on some other things. And basically, if you look with that new programmer analyst position, if you look down at the bottom, total for personnel, the FTE changes now from 9.1 to 9.35. Is there any questions on personnel? Okay, we'll move on to materials and supplies. You turn to page 121, please. Pretty much status quo. Look at 54301, there's a footnote explaining the difference there. And if we move down, software licensing maintenance fees, of course, is a very big one. But compared to last year, about a 9% increase. So cost of doing business, not a dramatic increase by no means. Is there any questions on materials and services? Okay, I'll move on to capital. 800-06, we have DP software. Set 70,000 aside. We're evaluating our disaster recovery site. A lot of the equipment's coming up for to need to be replaced in about a year. And so we're just looking at what that would cost to replace that equipment. We're also looking at other, some other ideas like DR as a service. We're kind of looking at just all, everything that's possible that we could do and just doing that cost analysis. And then we will come up with a proposal for the Board of Commissioners to approve at some point, depending which way we go. So that's what that's set aside for, as well as we have targeted some security measures. And I don't ever like to get into too much detail on the public forum regarding that, but we do have some money set aside for that as well. If we look at 80104, DP equipment purchase, there's another 60,000 there. And between 806 and 80104, I should mention we did the security audit a couple months ago and got a great report out of that. And we're evaluating that report and looking at priorities. And some of this money is going to be set aside, and we will, of course, get approval to spend that money as needed to, for areas that we need to improve on, essentially. Are there any questions on capital?
No question for me.
And any questions on 1017, the information technology budget? Okay, well, let's move on to 4814, telecommunications. We turn to page 122, please. Okay, let's start with revenue. Beginning balance, it's large, 619,000. And we basically cut extension rates about $5 per extension. And one of our capital projects that we completed was to convert the city off the old NEC-PBX system. And we've also converted Wycom, our business lines for Wycom over to ShoreTel. So everybody got a bit of a cost break there. So we're happy to help the departments with that. And we're still going to be looking at that the next budget cycle to see if, where we need to adjust rates, if they need to be adjusted further, hoping to bring that beginning balance back in line.
Yeah, just I'm gonna jump in, just, so Rick is our new member and Lindsay, this is her second round. But on this telecom budget, it's more than just county. We also provide telecoms, telephone support with the city, for the city of McMinnville, and also for, like you say, the Wycom business lines, not the 911 lines, but just their offices in general. So he oversees both the county, also courts. I forgot about the courts, which is actually that state agency in the courthouse, but we provide phones to the city, the county, the courts, and Wycom. And this fund is a holdover that a lot of the fees and things set up was based on the old system. We went to a VoIP system a number of years ago. And so it's actually more closely aligned with some of the other network and maintenance with the rest of the system, but we've still kept it because IT 1017 is strictly county. But this one, we've kept it in a separate fund because we do have other jurisdictions.
Yeah, makes sense.
All right,
Thank
thanks,
you.
Shane.
Thank you, Ken.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Ken. So if we look down a little further at under revenue, we got 362.30. telephone, that basically captures the cost that we get for our call costs and extension costs from Wycombe, the city, and the courts. And then, of course, 38001, our CO internal revenue, that's basically table 10, and what we collect from internal departments for call costs and extension costs. Any questions on revenue? All right, moving on to personnel. If you look at 40202, I zeroed that out. We've had it there for a couple of years, and we're just not going to fill that position. So I decided just to zero it out. If you look at 40350, that's the senior systems administrator that I referenced in the 1017 budget. That's just reflected in this budget. A portion of that time goes, 0.3 goes to this budget. And of course, then the FTE changes. If you look at total for personnel, it's going from 2.4 to 1.9 with that office specialist 2 cut, essentially. Any questions on personnel? Okay, moving on to materials and supplies. Let's start with 51306 software. We've got 10,000 set aside there. Sorry, we have 10,000 set aside. It's a bit of a change there. And I should mention that we have 41,000 set aside for last year, and we didn't actually spend it all. A lot of that was set aside for a Spoke update. Spoke software was our internal 911 location services database. And they had informed me last year that they were going to be charging us $36,000 for a software update, and we would have to spend $10,000 on a new physical server. It had to be a physical server. And so we started looking at our options, and we were able to move just to a different provider. And essentially, we didn't have to spend that $36,000. In fact, our maintenance, we ended up going over by 2 months, so we just had to pay like $1,500 instead of the normal $6,000. It was prorated for the year. So that was a really nice cost savings, and we moved, like I said, to a different provider. So that worked out really well for us. And then we set aside $10,000. Primarily, that may go to pay for half of our new help desk ticketing system that we're working with Christian on right now, and contracts essentially, and then making sure I know it's gone to the board. I think it got approved, is waiting for legal review, I believe, so we're getting in the final stages, I think, of having that approved, so that'll pay for a portion of that.
What was the final cost for the not going with Spoke? What was for the alternative?
It's actually, right now, it's looking like we're not gonna have to pay anything. Essentially, we just reduced one hop. Instead of going from CenturyLink to Entrado, we're working directly with Entrado. They give us a web portal to be able to administer, any changes that we have to do. And so, right now, it's looking like it's a really sweet deal. So, yeah, so we essentially saved about $46,000.
Wow. Nice.
Every day.
Yeah, worked out well. Okay.
This is similar to in the memo where John Burns saved us 28,000 or whatever. Oh, sorry. No, this is similar to the memo where you note that John Burns saved the county like 20 or 28,000 by doing the work that an outside vendor was going to, right?
Yeah.
It's familiar.
Absolutely. Okay.
Still good, but
61102, Department Equipment 54301, bit of a change there. Most of that monies is going to pay for the other half of those switches that you saw in the 1017 budget under Department Equipment. There was a footnote there. So a lot of this money is going to pay for half of those, and then there's some money set aside for anything that might come up. 61102, contract services. Big change there, but you can see the footnote. We decided to add a licensing, software maintenance and licensing line to this fund. It just made sense that some of those costs are really all in that category, and that should be there. So that's why that's changed. If you want to turn to page 123, There's the other, if you look at 68307, there's the new software licensing and maintenance fees, and a lot of that's going to go to pay for the short health maintenance, of course. So that's the money that's set aside for that. Everything else pretty much status quo. Any questions on materials and services? Okay.
Nope.
Moving on to capital. Capital under 80123, we set aside 50,000, and that's just simply in case anything comes up. Right now, our big project that we completed, of course, was getting, as we mentioned earlier, the city and Wycombe over to shore till that's done. So we do have an upgrade we have to look at some point. I'm just waiting for it to stabilize with our short tail system. It's called Connect. It's the next version. So there may be some costs there. So I've just kind of set that aside for a placeholder in case that comes up at some point in the year. Any question on capital? Okay. Then if you look at 9901, projected ending balance of $436,857. Any questions on 4814 telecommunications fund? All right. Let's turn the page to 124, the computer replacement fund. Essentially, this fund, all the departments pay in to this fund on a yearly basis so that by the end of the life cycle of their device, then they've essentially paid for a new device and we replace it for them. So laptops right now are on a 4-year life cycle and desktops are on a 5-year life cycle. And MDTs at the moment, we've got them on a 5-year life cycle as well.
Excuse me, Shane, could you explain for Rick, our new member, MDTs?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Good. Thank you for calling it out. Yeah, mobile device terminal. Essentially, the MDTs refer to the tablets that go inside the police cars. That's what they interact with all the systems. So that's what the MDTs are. Great question.
Thank you, Mary.
And they're expensive.
Yes, they are.
There's a lot to them in those units. It's more than just a laptop. I mean, because there's a whole unit that's built into the car, and they're quite expensive, and they're a lot of fun to replace.
Yeah, with the GPS, I mean, yeah, there's a lot of things going on in the car these days, so yes. Okay, so if we start with revenues, of course, 3821 general computer replacement, that's it. That's the revenues we collect from the various departments. Small increase there, just, usually it's due to increase in number of devices. And any given year, it could also be due to, if we play with costs or we have to adjust costs for a device. This year, we stayed flat pretty much on laptops. I think we had a $9 increase and maybe close to a $30 increase on desktops. Are there any questions on revenue? Okay, moving down to, I'm gonna talk about materials and services and the reserves that below kind of together because they really go together. So if we look at 54301, we kind of changed it up this year. 54301 department equipment, that $336,700 is what we're targeting to spend this year. And then we took the balance of the fund and moved it down to 990.29, just in a reserve for future capital expenditures, so future replacements. And we did the same with MDTs. For 54302, MDT equipment, there's a 0, and then if you look at 990.03, there's a reserve for future MDT replacements of 33,000, and that's because we're building that up for future replacements. Are there any?
And I would just add, this is based on, a lot of discussions that we've had in prior years that, typically prior to this year, he would keep everything in an expense line and keep all the funds available. What we're trying to do is get a little better organized to, one, have more funds available for the treasurer that's available for investment, because if we hold it in an expense line, it's not necessarily available for that. So this is another one of those categories where we're getting away from holding the entire balance of that account in an expense line. Shane's doing his, identifying how many PCs and laptops that he's gonna replace that year, making sure he has sufficient funds there, and then putting the rest into a reserve for the future. That again, it cannot be spent during the fiscal year, but it'll be there, it'll show up in the beginning balance and be available for next year. So we're trying to refine that, and you know, again, and that's discussions and feedback that we've had here during the last several budget processes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. And that is my presentation. Does anybody have any questions?
No, thank you, Shane.
Thank you.
Shane,
Thank you.
Great report.
Appreciate you guys.
Got lucky, no technical issues with the presentation.
Nothing made.
Reading that.
Thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to present for you, and I wish you a good day and stay safe out there.
Thank you very
Thanks
much.
for your
You
good work.
too.
See, can you flip this?
But not right now.
No.
We had somebody commuting from an IT professional from Golden Beach.
All right, so I'm looking at my list right now, and I believe this is about the last. I think we just have one fund to go over today, and that is Fund 80. And Justin, if you're watching, I'll just go ahead and do it.
What tab?
And it'll be on, there's a tab called Insurance Reserve, and it's on page 132.
Got it.
Everyone ready?
Go.
All right, so 8038, okay, this is a really large fund with Fund 80, and it's gonna be broken up into several divisions. Some of them are gonna be pretty small. 8038, this is what we call the administrative portion of that. Thinking about it. Like, reminded me, I missed another one in Fund 40, but I'll come back to it.
Was that administrative services one?
No, but here, I'll keep charging along through Fund 80, and I'll make sure I go back to 4117. So 8038 is the administrative portion. We have changed this. Historically, we haven't had staff in here, but we also recognize that we made several changes based on 4 or 5 years ago where we had a number of claims, you know, for the county. We recognized that we needed to beef up with, you know, risk management and funding and everything that's coming in the insurance reserve. And so in 8038, what you're going to see a reflection of, we have our HR manager, I have a portion of Justin's position, and we have a full-time HR analyst who does risk management built into this account. There's really, the only change that is in here is, was reflected, we mentioned that we moved a portion of the HR manager, half of her time into this to reflect the amount of time that she oversees the HR analyst, and then also the work that, like every other HR office does, their involvement in risk management overall for the jurisdiction. Not a lot of changes here. And this is one where we balance the entire fund, so we don't necessarily charge direct fees to the other portion of the fund. We just essentially balance this fund in total. So if the revenues look kind of funny, it's not that there's discretionary coming into it, it's just that we're balancing the entire fund. So any questions on the personnel? It's pretty straightforward in here with positions that are here. Again, there's some funds down below. just for support for those positions that we've built in to make sure that if they need to do anything from ergonomic assessments to software to, purchases or things like that, that's built into the materials and services. So any questions on materials and services? 8038 is pretty straightforward.
Clear to me. Thank you.
All right, if you turn the page to page 133, now we're going to switch gears a little bit. And then you have 8088, which is our dental insurance that we have for the county. We are self-insured. Our dental plan is self-insured, but we work with, I think, Delta Dental. I think it's Delta.
Yeah, it is.
It's been Moda, it's been Delta,
Same.
it's Delta now. So they administer the plan. We have a broker that we work with, BP&A, who handles all of our medical and dental and short-term disability and all the employee benefit insurance packages that we have. But this is our self-insurance for dental. We work with our broker, looking at numbers on how much we need to have budgeted in here. They set the rates, we have the funds come in, we need to make sure we have sufficient funds that if claims come in, we can cover all claims because we pay for those directly. It's gonna be interesting. I think for this one, we'll probably see an increase on the beginning balance because with the current restrictions and a lot of dentist offices have been closed, we're probably not gonna see as much expense if, hitting this portion of it because dentist offices are closed.
You got a honeymoon coming.
So any questions on dental? All right. Contingency, 8092, we do set some funds aside in contingency. We just want to make sure that we have some funds set aside. So we have another $500,000 that's here to be used for, any type of emergency or situation that comes up related to any of our insurance programs.
So this could be used across from dental to medical to property casualty. Okay.
So we really keep that, because if we get potentially a large property claim that maybe isn't covered, or if we get something that we have to self-insure, or if we have the, if we want to save on our experience and maybe access some of this because instead of letting the insurance company pay, that we may want to do paper to save on our experience, we have some funds available. The unappropriated balance, again, looking at the entire fund, you see we have a really good reserve. We have $3.7 million that I have set aside for reserve for the future that aren't held in the expense fund. This is the reason this number has gotten as large as it has. One, the change in workers' comp carrier helped us out. That our rates with our previous workers' comp provider was doing this, and when we made the move to SAFE, we ended up getting a much better rates, and so we saw some years with savings. The other part that I would highlight is when we get down to general liability, we've had several, I'm knocking on wood because the last couple of years, we've had some really positive experience as far as not having large claims. And so we're seeing some savings in that were, because of a lot of the risk management work that departments are doing, their HR has been doing and working with the brokers, it's paying off. And so there's been some changes, and so that's why we're seeing it. The other thing that I would call out is, and commissioners may recall, but in prior budget years, and this goes back to prior to Laura retiring and working, we did several large transfers of funds from the, to move more funds into the insurance reserve. Yeah. Because several years ago, there was concerns about it seemed like we were a claim away from having to explore options of going self-insured. So we wanted to make sure that we were starting to build up funds in the insurance reserve because we're right at that point as far as the size of the county. a lot of the really big counties are all self-insured, and we're in that middle group. It's not necessarily big enough that it makes sense to go self-insured, but we're getting close enough. And so making sure that we're setting up funds aside, that if a decision is made that we go self-insured, we have the option to do that. And so what you're seeing is several years of transfers, savings, and positive work experience is the reason we're getting, you're seeing this reserve fund being in place at this point. Any questions on 8094? 8133 is PEL reserve. This is a line that we hold because personal extended leave is something that the percentage of employees actually with personal extended leave, this goes way back many years ago, many contracts when the county converted from a vacation sick leave model to a combined PTO model that we call FET, here locally, flexible earn time. Anyone who had an outstanding sick leave balance, that was moved into what was called a PEL account. Right now, under the current contracts, there's a cap on accrual for FET, and any employee who hits that cap, which is 24 times your monthly accrual rate, if you hit your cap, any hours, FET hours earned in excess of that goes into a PEL account. And so we have a liability. There's only limited times that you can access PEL, which is any, extended absences related to a medical condition, or at retirement, a portion is eligible for sell back to that retiring employee, that they can sell those hours back and it goes into, they either take a cash payment or it can go into an HSA. This number reflects, we do, Mike Barnhart runs a report, we look at PEL balances across the county, and we look at the dollar value, and it's a liability that we carry, so we budget that liability in this line. So if I have, if I have an employee in 1010 who has a PEL balance, they retire, they cash out, we have this liability that we can transfer, so that way that department's not impacted by that. So this is just to carry that liability. 8134, that's our property insurance. This is another one that we have the fees for our broker. We also have the premium expenses, and it's not just we have property, but then also any of our excess coverages as far as earthquake. I'm trying to think. There's
Umbrella.
Yeah, there's a few coverages that we have built into that. So we have the premium, and then we also carry funds to help departments with any deductibles, and then also self-insurance, because there are times that we do try to take care of, if it's a smaller amount, instead of having it counted against our experience, we may take care of it with a self-insurance, so we carry a small self-insurance in there as well. Any questions on property? And if I'm going too fast through Fund 80, just let me know.
Rick might need a little tutorial. He doesn't
Yeah.
understand any of
He
this
doesn't
stuff.
know. He doesn't know
Fine.
anything
I
about
was trying to
insurance,
think
so
of the joke. That was the
What
joke.
is your,
Thank you.
what is your retention on this?
I don't have it.
Okay.
He might get a text in a few minutes, though.
Yep.
Yeah, so all of our coverage, our property and our liability is still CIS, City County Insurance, so. Let's see, retirement reserve 8135. So this is the retirement reserve that I was mentioning, the county, until this year, we're not putting any funds, we haven't transferred any general funds into this, but we have these funds. The only additional revenue that's coming into this, there was an interfund loan at 4027 is retained into this. So otherwise, you have the 2.2 million. 8136 time loss reserve. This is a long-standing time loss reserve account that the county has had set up, that we charge 0.1% on salary to go into this time loss reserve. And the intent of this time loss reserve is if I'm a department, I have an employee who's out on a workers' comp claim, I need to hire somebody to come in and fill for that, I have a need. We have a time loss account that then we can transfer to that department to help offset the costs for doing that. Admittedly, this is a fund that is underutilized by most of the departments. Sometimes they struggle with, well, by the time I get them fully trained up, the other person is back to work. So it's something that I'm trying to encourage more, departments to use it when they need to, because this is why it's built in here. So we have a time loss reserve. This is one of the funds that we're taking a serious look at on if we're not seeing as much activity, we may stop doing a time loss reserve account. And then, departments wouldn't have to budget for it, and there wouldn't be. But again, it's a pretty small amount, as you can imagine. For this year, for all of our total payroll, we're talking $44,000 for the year. So I mean, it's a small amount,
Yeah.
but you can see that it's really being underutilized. So next one is our workers' comp reserve. This is where we pay. This one we try to hold expenses available for return to work, ADA, ergonomic improvements. If we have somebody who may be returning from an on-the-job injury and we need to make improvements, we have grant funds that we can access through SAFE. There's funds that come through to support that, but we also maintain some expenditure authority in here and funds to help if we have something major that we need to help with a return to work. And then we also have the premiums, which is an estimate. We try to do our best to do our estimate. Right now we do a payroll, and we just need to make sure on 61006, I'm sorry. My wife did this, sorry. 61008 workers' comp insurance, that's our premium. We put that in there with an estimate, looking at our payroll, but recognize we get the renewals in, we get the audit, the payroll audit that occurs in the fall, we'll see some adjustments. Nice part for last year, just to kind of highlight in workers' comp reserve, if you look at line 80, 137, 362.12 reimbursement, you'll see in the year-to-date actual that we did get money back from SAFE this year.
Dividend check.
Yeah, so we got a dividend on that. So I just want to say that was some good news that we got on that. The other line is 61006, the workers' comp non-disabling claim reimbursement. This is one that we have an option with SAFE that any claims under a certain amount, we can just pay, they'll invoice us, we pay those directly, and it doesn't get counted against our experience. So this is something that it's been really successful for us. It was fairly new when we did the move to SAFE, and it really helped us on our experience rating. And especially with how large the county is and just the nature of the positions and the work that we're doing. We have some positions that are in those more extensive workers' comp categories. Imagine law enforcement, public works.
I was imagining.
All right, 8138, liability reserve. So this is our general liability. Again, just like our property insurance, I didn't really highlight that, but we put in budget instructions. We give instructions out to departments on what to budget, and when we do internal transfers, they come into each of those funds. And that's where the revenue comes from to pay the premium. And then we also have some minor markups to make sure we're capturing some funds for deductibles and additional costs associated with that budget. The general liability, this is always a fun one to explain. We're pretty close to being self-insured because we're on a retro on our liability. So what CIS does is they determine what our premium will be, we're only obligated, we're billed, we pay 60% of that premium amount, but for any claims that, if we get sued and any claims against us, we're responsible up to 130% of that premium amount. We've been benefiting for the last couple of years because I want to be very careful and make sure, and you'll see that reflected in the budget, between the miscellaneous insurance claims and the liability insurance, to ensure that we have sufficient funds to not only pay the premium, but should we have a claim before, because we have to meet that out-of-pocket maximum before CIS starts paying, we do budget that full 130% of that amount to make sure we have sufficient funds available. Should we get a claim, we can pay that. And so that's built into the budget. The great part is you have, like our last couple of years where we've had really good experience and no large claims, we come out ahead because we're not paying, we're only paying 60% of that premium. So we're going to see a savings for that difference each year. And not to mention, we're not paying out deductibles and everything else. It's as close as we can get kind of to being self-insured because we don't necessarily have deductibles. We have an out-of-pocket maximum. And so it's a really large amount that we have to meet before they start paying. That's probably the best I've explained it.
That's good.
Last
You
year.
did good.
It was the
Good job.
briefest too.
Also
get
in
that,
this,
Rick?
we have, you'll see internal
did.
legal services for 41,000. We also do a transfer to Christian's budget and there's funds that he does, county council charges to fund 80, and that's one of the lines that comes out. And of course, our risk management, it's a team effort, because it's from, actually, it's
Every
from
department head.
department heads, it's our employees. Our employees play a large part in not only working safely, but managing risk. But we also, our department heads have a critical role in risk management. But for the longest time, we've done it, county council, HR, and my position, those have been, that's the main team for administering risk management. We did make the shift in adding the risk manager a couple of years ago because recognizing that we do need to, there's a lot of work to be done in that team HR position. And I think we're seeing the benefits as we, if you have any questions.
I do. The elected official employee bond,
Yes.
$10,000. What is that?
So under our current county ordinance, it's a county, it's each elected official is required to have a bond. And so all of you are bonded, I'm bonded. We actually go out and purchase a bond. This is something that Christian and I have been talking about. We need to update that ordinance because we also purchase excess crime coverage, which does exactly the same thing as having a bond. We all, so this is one that you don't see. We're working on the expense. I think there might be a coding issue, the reason we're not seeing it in here. I need to talk to Justin and I will need to follow up on that. So we work with our broker and we purchase a bond for each of you. You're bonded.
Okay, thank you.
And then we also have to, by statute, have to have bonds for our probation officers. So that's another one that we also purchase through here as well.
Can the elected officials, and we're bonded, at what amount are we bonded at?
I knew you were gonna ask me that, that's why I was buying time. I don't have that number off the top of my head, but I can get that for you. Admittedly, it's changed, over time, because the ordinance is so old, it's like, you need to be bonded for $300. I mean, it's that old.
Sure.
It's an old ordinance, but I wanna say it's, if I remember off the top of my head, it's right around 20 or 25,000, but I can confirm. And then, any questions on general liability? Any other?
I just have a comment and a question. Great job setting this up. This is very sophisticated, complicated, but you're doing very well and successful at it. Do you see that at times with the reserves being so healthy that you have thresholds where you would say this money should go back maybe to the general fund? I mean, do you have those lines or
To be
points.
honest, we're in new territory with that, and that was something that I was just looking at, because this is one that 4 years ago, Laura and I were talking about when we were having these claims and recognizing that we needed to start building up our insurance reserve. And then with the changes that were made, we're just now starting to see the benefits that the insurance reserve is.
It'd be nice to create your own dividend for your hard work in a sense, you know,
Right.
to help fund the other issues that we're facing.
Because the challenges that, I will point out, and, for everyone who's watching the meeting and here, as well, the one thing we have to be really careful with is the funds that are coming into insurance reserve are a combination of discretionary and restricted funds. It's a mix. So we have departments, so the money's coming in, we have a mix of HHS, community corrections, fee-generated revenue from those departments that are strictly fee, like planning, and we have discretionary funds. So any funds coming in that direction, we'd have to do reverse engineering.
Right.
That way, if we were gonna distribute those funds back to departments, we need to make sure we're following that same model. So this isn't that we can take $1 million out of that reserve and just go patch a hole in one particular department. That if we're going to, the way we bring the fees, the funds into this budget, I think we need to do the same thing going back out.
That's fine.
And based on that percentage, but it's something.
But I think it's just something to consider, saying, here's our goal. Once we reach that, then why keep funding it, I guess,
Yep.
at some point.
And it was something that we did roll out for this budget. We looked at our budget instructions and we did reduce the amounts that departments, because we're
Charging.
looking at that on readdressing what we're charging to departments, and departments should have seen the savings in what was being transferred out to help offset. So a combination.
It's another way, yeah.
That we could reduce the fees, but at the same time, maybe we're also offering a dividend that go out, and especially for risk management for those departments that are doing a nice job managing risk, and and the county's doing well, that we should recognize that. In fact, I have a formula ready to go based on that discussion, that recognizing the current climate we're in right now, the asks that we've had coming forward from the various departments. And when we look at, when we get into deliberations tomorrow, the demands on general fund monies, that I have a formula ready to go, that if there's, if the committee would like to, okay, we've got $3.7 million in that insurance reserve, maybe we need to send that back out to departments to help with the current climate.
You have the formula.
I can plug that number in.
Might be nice to have that in your back pocket.
I have it ready.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
The last little budget that's in here, there's a medical insurance reserve, and this is something that goes back. This is another one that I would like to get distributed back out to departments. This is a fund that's, that it's a number of years ago that that I think is available, that I think we should send it back to the department.
Sometimes those grandfather things become grandfathered.
Right, because we don't have any additional funds. These are just that 144,000, a small amount, and something we've been carrying for several years now. And so I'd like to transfer that out of here. And that is insurance reserve.
Good
Our
job.
favorite one.
Nice. Good job.
Any questions?
No.
I went really quick on that one, so. I
Great explanation.
apologize.
Yeah.
Really,
Thank you.
great explanations.
Let me see if I can find 4117 on which to. just have one more budget to go over for today.
It's the commissioner's budget, right?
I think we already did that, didn't we?
We already did.
Did we do that?
That's where we had the conversation, Mary, about travel.
Oh, okay.
Right.
That's, yes, we did.
What is 4117, Ken?
It's software reserve.
Yeah, I was like, that's.
Oh,
what I
yeah.
thought.
That was at the end of IT, I think.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, that was the one I was like, hey, why are we not
It
doing that one?
wasn't in IT.
Yeah, I think so.
Mhm. I think it's the very last page.
Mm,
No,
Yeah.
It's 40.
not the very last one.
Thank you, page 125.
What tab?
It's under IT, but it's
Okay.
kind of in the back of it.
Okay.
All right, so this was the last one, we missed this one in Fund 40. So 4117. This is a fund that we've been transferring funds over a number of years for anticipation of replacing our central finance system. So there's a couple other projects that were in here, and there's one still in here. HHS had a large project, their Juniper project, which is a major software project. They still have some maintenance and update fees still in this budget that they're still spending down. This was also a fund historically that where Derek and the Thomson Reuters project was in this fund. We call this the software reserve. Now it's really down to the two projects, what's remaining for the HHS software. You'll see that there's 43,308. This is something the HHS spends down each year, and eventually that'll get zeroed out. At this point, we've carried forward, you'll see that we budgeted for finance software purchase. We have a placeholder for 250,000. Mike Barnhart's still going through the RFP process for bringing on a consultant that's going to assist us get ready for that upgrade conversion. And that's what those funds are set aside. And then the 1,498,426 is currently what we have set aside and budgeted for the finance software.
And you'll probably run all of that.
We'll probably be asking for more. So, we don't know what that number is really gonna look like. Mike Barnhart's been really active in talking to his counterparts in other jurisdictions, especially those that have just gone through a
Don't
software
reinvent the wheel.
conversion. And they were like, good luck to you. Those that went through it, because there's a lot of challenges. Our current system is run by Harris. We have that software, it's been updated several times, but we've had it in place since 1996. It's time to update it. I think you heard that during my budget presentation. And so this is the funds that we have available for that project.
It's a good start.
So any questions? To be
It's
very
familiar.
honest, this is gonna be a multi-year project as well. Just all the fact that it's a central finance system, that includes all the various modules, being able to bring in, do the evaluation, find the software that's gonna be most appropriate for our local use that matches our existing processes, or how much software is gonna make us change our processes to match the software.
That's the key.
Discussions. Our current system has a lot of customization that's built into it and a lot of customized reports and things like that. So how do you get that? And then data conversion is going to be the other tricky one.
You know, the reason a lot of software systems like that fail, and Rick and I were talking about one yesterday,
Yeah.
is because they try to take basically an off-the-shelf system, and they try to customize it enough to do the way they do, and that just breaks things farther. So you answered the really question is, how much does the software do that we have to change the way we do things to match what the software does to keep those customizations down?
Right.
That's the secret. But I'll tell you, Ken, be honestly with you in the budget committee, I'm not so sure until about 2 years ago that we even had the staff that could pull off this kind of a project. So, but now I'm very confident that we have, between you, Justin, Mike, and everything, I think we have the staff now that could pull off this kind of project.
Yeah, we also have Shane.
Yeah, Shane.
Go on this.
Sure.
So we have, I think we're like looking forward to eventually getting this project underway. At the same time, not looking forward to getting this project underway because, you know, it's going to be a major.
It always is. I'd be visiting those counties and asking lots of questions and looking at what their issues were.
All right. So I think we were able to get through all of the funds and divisions for the entire budget. So at this point, that's all we have for presentations for today. That's all we have for presentations until compensation committee tomorrow morning. So we'll start tomorrow morning with the compensation committee, and we have Andrea Paola, who's our HR manager, who will be presenting. You know, you'll see the comps that HR presents every year, and then after the compensation committee agrees on recommendations, we'll reconvene the budget committee and then go into deliberations and then able to track all the changes and all that spreadsheet for each of you to help kind of track on the actions that we're going to take.
Thank you.
But thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Can we request specific information? Like, I guess I'm talking specifically about county council because they're asking for an additional $25,000 for outside counsel. And Christian mentioned that we spent, funds in last budget cycle on outside counsel specifically for the trail. And I would like to know before we deliberate on that, what exactly was spent, how much money was spent on that outside counsel, as well as is any of the anticipated $25,000 going to the trail? Does he anticipate that for outside counsel for the trail? I would like to know those specifics before we actually vote on that.
Okay, a lot of times what we'll do is if there's questions on a specific request or ask like that, we usually invite that person to come and make that information available and attend and answer questions. And
Okay.
we'll also talk to Christian. I'll let him know
Okay,
the type of information you're looking for.
thank you.
Good.
All right. Well, 2020-21 budget committee will adjourn for the night.
Right.
Thank you.
Again.
Thank you, everybody.
Again.
Thank you.
Good job, Ken.
So
Oh, yeah.